Not yet. Member Hart will be joining us virtually. In person, we have Member Lear, Member Wood, and Vice Chair Carey, and I'm Matt Hymas. Looks like Member Hart will be on in just a couple of minutes, but we'll go ahead and get started. We do not have any public comment to begin with, so we will jump straight to agenda item 3.2, data sharing agreement with Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. And we're going to invite Katie Chalice to tee us up. Public comment to begin with, so we will jump straight to. And can we get that muted on that other side, Vanessa, or opportunity? We're going to invite Katie Chalice to tee us up. And can we get that muted on that other side, Vanessa, or opportunity?
Good morning, committee. Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. This data sharing agreement is a four-party agreement because the program requires quite a bit of data sharing between multiple parties. So this, the Upstart program, you might know, used to be administered by the State Board of Education and then was legislatively moved to the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. The GOEO is seeking data sharing for two purposes. One is because they're legislatively required to provide, to ensure that the services that they're providing to these preschool students, that those same preschool students ultimately, that the majority of them ultimately make it into the public education system. So they do some degree of data sharing with our agency to ensure that 90% of the students who participated in Upstart, at least 90%, ended up in kindergarten the next year. That's one piece of the data sharing. Additionally, GOEO partners with a third-party program evaluator, ETI in this case, to determine the efficacy of the program. And they are seeking from the board certain data elements related to student achievement so that they can assess whether participation in the Upstart program ultimately led to greater success when the students entered kindergarten and beyond. And I think that concludes my summary. We have a couple folks online, Chair. Oh, we do not have a couple folks online. Okay, we had a couple folks who were planning to attend online that they might be having technical difficulties, is my best guess.
Well, we'll start with the committee asking you questions, if that's okay. And if you can't, then you can defer. And if we have to, if people aren't online and aren't ready and we have to wait, then that's on them. Okay?
Yeah.
All right, Member Wood.
Thank you. Quick question, and it's not, it is what you just said legislatively, that they have to ensure that a minimum of 90% of the children attend kindergarten in Utah. Kindergarten is not mandatory. So how is there a mandate that if you participate in this, you need to be in kindergarten, or we need to track that when kindergarten is not a mandatory requirement for our families?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I admit I may have misspoken there. My understanding is that the goal is to ensure that they enter the K-12 public education system. So it might be broader than just kindergarten. They might be also checking for first grade enrollment, for example.
Follow up.
Sorry, but it does say that on page 8, the purpose is to identify the SSIDs of students enrolled, ensuring that a minimum of 90% of the children attend kindergarten in Utah the year after their program enrollment. So that's part of the contract that we're looking at.
That's part of the agreement. Okay, yeah, interesting. I had not considered that. It looks like we do have Assistant Attorney General Todd Jensen online, who is the Assistant Attorney General that serves GOEO. He might have an answer to that question.
Hello.
Yeah. Let's hear from AAG Jensen, and then we'll go to Member Lear.
I apologize. I have to repeat the question. I was only admitted to this meeting a few moments ago, so I don't know what the question is.
This is more a question on terms of legislative mandate. It says that this agreement, the first purpose of this agreement would be to ensure that a minimum of 90% of the children attend kindergarten in Utah the year after the program enrollment. However, kindergarten is not a mandated requirement for our families. And so I'm just trying to understand how the program works if we're supposed to be looking at this mandate of 90% when they don't have to begin with.
Well, that is a part of it. The legislature requires reporting from the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity about this program. So the 90% requirement is one aspect of it, but GOEO has other reporting requirements with the legislature about this program.
Member Lear, she had kind of a response, and then we'll.
Let me just interject sort of a little bit of a different interpretation than Member Woods. I think that the way Member Woods said it is pretty commonly understood. Kindergarten's not mandatory, but in fact, it's the school year of kindergarten that is not mandatory. So if a student comes to a school district having not had that year of kindergarten, the school can decide, and more they let students at that stage enroll in first grade. But technically and legally, the school district can say, no, we begin our studies in kindergarten and you need to enroll first in kindergarten, even if you're 6. So really, it's the compulsory age of education in Utah from which we say kindergarten is not mandatory, but really it's that year that is not mandatory. So I think that keeps this from being inconsistent. I don't know that schools are prepared to say to parents who expect their children to start first grade that, no, we expect you to start in kindergarten when they've kind of gotten out of that habit. But so it might still be a practical problem.
And you may have discussed this already, but this is a continuation of the program that's already been in existence for a number of years. And we have the same parties on this data sharing agreement that have been involved over the past few years. So the Utah State Board of Education, GOEO, ETI, and Waterford were involved as parties under the previous agreement with Utah State Board of Education, with USHE. So this isn't anything new. It's just a continuation of what's been going on for the past number of years.
Thank you, AAG Jensen. And Katie, I don't know if you had more. Leanne, I don't know if you had a follow-up. If you need more, let's, if we don't have any more, do we have any other questions on this? Okay. I'd be happy to seek a motion. Please, Member Lear.
Thank you, Matt. I move that the committee approve the data sharing agreement with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, ETI, and Waterford, and forward to the board for approval.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve the data sharing agreement with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, ETI, and Waterford, and forward to the board for approval. Seeing no additional discussion or lights to that, all in favor, say aye.
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 Member Hart, and then any opposed or abstaining? That sounds unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Director Chalice. Thank you, AAG Jensen. Let's move on to agenda item 3.3, research data sharing agreement with IXL Learning. That's a number that I don't know. I'll do my research. Recommended. We're going to turn it over to Katie Chalice. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. In your defense, I believe it's just an acronym, so you're off the hook. And I think we're joined online by Dr. Bo Bashkov. So thanks, Bo, for being here. If you have any questions for him in particular, but I'll queue us up. So this IXL Learning is a company that contracts with the STEM Action Center They provide many different subject area softwares, but the subject area of math in particular, they have a contract with them so that LEAs with the STEM Action Center so that LEAs can use that product if they choose to. They're seeking data from the State Board of Education on for two purposes. One is to determine whether their program is effective for students, and also to determine if their predictive tests built into their software are aligned with our end of year assessments. I think that concludes my summary, Chair.
Before, as we're kind of thinking about this, can I ask Bo, how many other states are you working with?
IXL is used by 15 million students across the US in all states and territories.
So if I can speak frankly, not getting Utah would not be a big hit to you.
That is correct, but we do care about Utah teachers and students. And even though the Utah Education Policy Center associated with the University of Utah does conduct impact studies on IXL and other products that are on the approved grant with the STEM Action Center, those reports are periodic, and the next one is not expected until summer 2025, I believe. So we are requesting data to conduct our own study and get these results to LEAs sooner.
Thank you, Bo. I'll share my context for that comment. As I looked at this, we're looking at PII, sharing personal information, identifiable information. And as a committee, I'm kind of proud of our committee for being very questioning it to the very least, right? But we've tried to do a good job of saying, no, these are our family's data that belongs to the family. And most of the time, for me anyway, I can only speak for me, if I vote for something to give out data, it's because the parents have agreed to give out their data. And I don't see that in here. And so there's some there's some concerns that I have. I guess I'll end it there. So, Bo, I appreciate that. Let's open it up to any other questions, motions, or whatever from the committee. Member Lear.
What benefit, Katie, maybe this is for you, maybe Dr. Bashkoff, but what benefits are there to LEAs and then subsequently to the families in having this data processed by IXL? Are there any benefits? I should start that way.
Yeah, I think any benefits would be indirect. So it would be essentially IXL could use the data to improve their product. So for the students who use the product, then in theory, they would benefit from.
And again, remind me what I'm maybe just missing it, but I'm not clear what the product really does for us, for even for LEAs, let alone families.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. So it's used in schools as a math software, a curriculum software, and as I understand, there's like assessments built into it as well.
Okay.
So it's being used in some schools in Utah, not all.
To simplify then, it's something math teachers it's a software that some math teachers use and to teach math, and this might help the product be more effective. Is that simply stated accurate?
Yes,
Okay.
I believe so.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Vice Chair Carey.
Thank you, Chair. Director Chalice, is the software that's being used in our public schools provided at a charge, or is it are they able to use that at no cost?
That's a good question. As I understand, this particular program is provided at no cost for LEAs that apply for the grant through the STEM Action Center. There might be, it looks like Bo is shaking his head yes. So I wasn't sure if it was a cost match or if it's fully funded, but it sounds like it's fully funded. And it also looks like Vice Chair Hart has.
Could we just hear that from Bo? And then I have a follow-up question too, Chair, if that's appropriate. But if we could hear from Bo on, I just want to know if are our schools out of pocket for using this software?
Thank you for all those questions, and I would like to address each of them very briefly and get to the last one. We request personal identifiable information (PII) only for the purpose of linking state assessment data to IXL usage data. Once the data are linked, we remove all identifiers, all names, all personal identifiable information. And in that analysis data set, there's no way of telling who is who. So we understand completely and agree that privacy is essential and important, and you can just share data casually. So completely agree with all of you there. Um, as to the question of if it's used, how it's used, it basically helps teachers differentiate instruction, which since the COVID pandemic, it has become even harder to support students at different levels. So if you're a teacher in, say, fifth grade, you will have some students working below grade level, far below grade level, maybe 2 or 3 grade levels below. So it can be very challenging to support all those students. So a personalized instruction program like Excel, and there are others that are also on the approved grant, really help to differentiate instruction and maximize teachers' time in the classroom and student learning ultimately, which is the goal. If districts and schools have to pay for the program, like Katie said, if they are applying through the grant, they don't have to pay. However, there are stricter rules to maintain those licenses. So you have to show that you're actually using the program, you're actually um, benefiting from it. So there are some criteria there. Of course, there are schools and districts in Utah who choose to purchase IXL, like many others in other states. But I think the bulk of our users in the state of Utah um, go through the STEM Action Center Math Personalized Grant.
And then Chair, follow up. So both, thank you for that. And I thought in your opening comments, you indicated that the University of Utah is going to do a similar assessment that you're proposing now. It's just that you're concerned that their assessment isn't going to be till next year, and you would like to do it sooner. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's one reason. The other is that they tend to study grades 3 to 8 with the RISE assessment. We would like to expand those grade levels to include elementary and high school as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Member Hart?
Yeah, so I just want to fill in a few holes there. This is a STEM Action Center grant. Districts have the opportunity to choose between several programs. You request a certain number of licenses. There's never enough to go around. So you then have to, if you want the full number that you need to pay for the remainder of them. Some districts don't have to, they have means to just purchase it on their own. The analysis is something that I believe, now that part, I believe the STEM Action Center is involved in those analyses as well. My issue, so that's it's the STEM Action Center. So it is part of a grant, and of that grant, you usually get maybe a third of the licenses you need, so you end up supplementing. So it's kind of both. My concern is that I'm okay if a parent consents to a child using a program, a commercial program, and the data being used even without PII, if the parent has agreed to it. If the parent hasn't agreed ahead of time and a company is benefiting from the data, I find an issue there. And so I know it's de-identified, and that's great for the study purposes, but I still think that companies are benefiting on the backs of students and parents don't know about it. And so unless a parent gives permission ahead of time, I'm not inclined to support data being used commercially outside of our schools individually. You know, teachers use the data, yes, and there's really good data there. I'm very concerned when somebody else is benefiting off of our students' data without parents knowing. If parents know, I'm more inclined. Without parents knowing, I'm less inclined.
Thank you. Member Hart, Member Wood.
I just want to appreciate what Vice Chair Hart has said. I think that we have shown in the past in our committee that when we allow parents to make that choice, we're willing to move forward with certain data sharing because the parent has made that choice. It is not our role in any way to decide where their children's data goes, especially to an outside entity for profit. Thank you.
Member Lear.
Do we know, Katie? I know you're not the content expert, but I'm trying to figure out if math teachers who are using this in the state really love the software, and maybe this is a Molly question as well, then I would be more inclined to support it. I don't have always the sensitivity maybe that some board members have about sharing data that I believe benefits the teachers, the schools, the students. So I want to do this if math teachers really use this. If it's just a program that's hanging out there and occasionally use it, not so inclined. Do you know how well, if this is a great program? Do you know, Molly, if this is a great?
If you're willing to take anecdotal data, and this is not my data because I can't afford the program, but I have used it in other places. I've used it in other states, and my colleagues that use it across, like in different districts, very much enjoy using the program. The program is solid. That isn't the issue at all. The issue is benefiting.
And that's a problem for me also. I'm weighing the two. And let me ask you a more complicated question, if that's okay, and maybe to Molly or Katie. You suggested that there's never enough licenses to go around, so the school or the teacher or the program has to buy. Do you feel like that's an intentional kind of a situation where we're kind of, and forgive me, Dr. Bashkoff, but we've got to talk about the realities that we see. So is this intentional so that we're given just enough that we like it and would like it for all students, and so then we invest in an expensive program?
Right.
Is that too pointed of a question?
Let me be clear. That is not anything a fault of IXL or any of the other math programs that are available. However, I do wonder, however, the alternative, since the legislature, this is an appropriation, it is their issue to add to that, or else only it would become more competitive rather than spreading it out. You know, the way they're doing it right now at the STEM Action Center allows for more schools to get something.
I get it.
So you can either give everybody something or you give a few people everything they need. The problem is that when you ask for 300 licenses because you have 300 seventh graders, if you only get 49, you've got to pick which 49 are on a program. And that's very, very difficult for a teacher to, one, keep straight, two, choose the students, because students go in and out of proficiency and you really need to switch it out. You just can't plan around a really solid program that's designed to give you metrics throughout the year. You can't just put 3 kids in your class on that, or 10 kids, and then have to do something with the other ones. It's just, so you end up having to purchase. Now, I did forget one piece. You purchase at the contracted price, not the full price. So at least they do give you, the STEM Action Center works on a negotiated price for the remainder of those licenses.
Thanks. Thank you. That does help me. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a comment from Vice Chair Carey, or question.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question to Director Chalice. It appears that the members would be more inclined to let this go forward if there was parental consent on the sharing of this information. Could you briefly describe how that would look and how IXL would go about doing that? Is that something feasible? Is that too much money? Like, why isn't that something they would just do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it would be close to impossible. And this is why, because they are seeking data for all students in the state, and not all students in the state use the program. So even because my first thought was like, well, maybe they could build consent into, the registration process or something, but even then that wouldn't cover it. So I don't see a world where they could obtain parent consent for this.
Chair, I'm ready to make a motion.
Please.
And if I could, the motion would be that the committee not approve this data sharing agreement. And then if I could speak to it.
Okay. Please. Well, so let me read back what I think this is going to sound like. That the committee not approve the data sharing agreement with IXL Learning, and that's it. Or would we just take no motion or no action and move on? But please speak to your thoughts, and then I think we'll just do no action, unless. Oh, well, unless we want to actually say, no, we are not accepting this.
No.
Okay.
That's unnecessary. Thank you.
Okay. With that, then, I don't see any other hands or lights from committee members with any sort of other motions. So, Bo, we appreciate your time, but we do not have any motion for this committee. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
With that, let's move to agenda item 3.4, R277-608, prohibition of corporal punishment in Utah's public schools. And we have Elise Newey going to cue us up here.
All right. Thank you so much, Chair. If I could, so Elise Newey, Deputy Superintendent of Policy, and if I could take a moment of personal privilege to just shout out our incredible staff. These 2 rules, usually when staff work on rules, it's like a 1 month, 2 month process. These 2 rules have been in process for about 9 months now. This is our baby. So I just wanted to shout them out and just let you know that they have worked with the field, all kinds of members of our field, all kinds of members of the public, various other staff members throughout our agency. And so they have a wealth of information. So I just hope that you feel empowered to ask them tough questions and that we have a really great conversation about these 2 rules because they've done so much work on this. So this first rule is 608, prohibition of corporal punishment. Yeah. So right now, staff, let me give a little background. So we brought this before this committee in November with draft 1. We had received some additional, or the committee had received some additional feedback from the field just within that 24 hours. And so it was the decision of this committee to postpone the conversation until December. The staff and I have looked at all the feedback that we received in November and incorporated that into draft 2. So this is that incorporated draft. There is also a draft 3 in backup, and this board member Lear is bringing this one forward, but it also incorporates additional feedback that we have received since backup was due last week. So this is all feedback that staff is in support of, if that's what the committee wants to go forward with. But we wanted to leave that decision up to you all. So we can start with draft 2 unless someone wants to make a motion to consider draft 3.
I wondered, I see Member Lear getting ready to, but I'm wondering as we look at draft 2 to 3, I'm just curious because draft 3 came in quite late.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
can we look at, or can you even pull up draft 3 and say, okay, here's what draft 2 had, here's the latest change. Can you do that for the committee?
Absolutely. So if you look at draft 3, the draft 2 changes are in blue and red. So those were things that had been added in between committee meeting in November and backup due date last week. Anything that has been added since is in green and purple. So those are things that are new to Board Member Lear's draft. So you'll see there is one of the pieces of feedback we received in November was to just reword this to make it a little bit more clear and concise. So that was changed in blue. Trying to think what is most important. There was a conversation about key identified school employees and who needed to take one of the required trainings from this rule. And so that some of those changes for clarification are in blue on line 79 through 82. A lot of the changes that you'll see in blue and red have to do with making the requirements more clear and concise and cutting down language. So a lot of it was not substantive in nature. It didn't change the requirements, just made the requirements more clear. So you'll see that on line 90, for example, this requirement for a school employee to be authorized to use ESI was somewhere else in this rule. And so we cut that line so that it wasn't doubling up and confusing LEAs.
Question in the middle here.
Yeah, Chair, just a quick question, because in the descriptor, it says draft 3, green text is additions and purple text is deletions. But when I'm looking at line, right there, perfect, stop.
Sorry.
It's like a roller coaster ride. I'm like,
Wait a sec.
but like line 90, it looks like is that red deletion made in draft 2, or are you saying that was a deletion made in draft 3?
Draft 2.
Okay, so if it is in purple, that's a draft 3.
Mm-hmm.
Deletion, if it's in green text, that's an addition.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
And I'm not sure if I should move draft 3 before we hear from Elise, or but it sounds like the staff is and to be fair, to give credit where it's due, most of the changes, many of the important changes in draft 3 came from Leanne in working with the sponsor of the, do I have the right bill? No, I don't have, I take it back. Never mind, I'm combining 608 and 609. But the changes are not necessarily mine, but I did agree to have my name on the draft. So I'll start wherever, but it seems we ought to start with 3 if it really has more of the language that the staff supports. So just offering that.
We can continue going through this, or we can just say, hey, we're going to go through this anyway. We're going to work from draft 3.
I think
that's what I'm hearing. Is there any opposition? We can put it to a vote. Member Carey, Vice Chair Carey.
It's not really opposition, but all my notes and all of the proposed motions I have are tied to draft 2, in that was the one that was available up until I think it was yesterday. So I would prefer draft 2, and that we treat any of the draft 3 additions or deletions as amendments. But again, not really opposition, but rather just as a matter of
that can work.
Convenience.
Would it be helpful then, Vice Chair Carey, for you, as we're looking at this, to continue looking through draft 3 so you can get a visual, or do you have that in front of you where you don't need that? Okay, so let's then pull up draft 2, and Elise or staff, is there anything else we want to say about this before we jump into, because obviously there's going to be some amendments presented. because we have a draft 3 and Vice Chair Carey has some amendments as well. Is there anything you would like to say on draft 2, or even draft 3? I don't mind. We're going to work from draft 2, but any follow-up comments before we open it up to committee members?
I'm trying to think what's most important. There were so many changes. And if you guys have any thoughts, a couple of the big conversations that had happened in between draft 2 and draft 3, just so that you're aware, is about chemical and mechanical restraint, those definitions, and making sure those had been in this rule or a rule at USBE for a very long time. And so we looked at those very carefully and got a lot of feedback on them. And so one of the changes that was made in between 2 and 3 is to prohibit chemical restraint completely. So not allow any of the exceptions that are part of drafts 1 and 2. Mechanical restraint, we also made a few tweaks to make sure that it was very clear when that would be allowed and when it is not, and under what circumstances. So that's one to just note.
Thank you. I think that's helpful. Vice Chair Carey.
Is it time for questions, or are we still going through the?
Nope. I think we're good for questions. Let's open it.
And I just a quick question, Deputy Newey, based on what you just said about the chemical restraints in draft 3, that appears those changes appear to be on lines 30 and 31.
Mm-hmm.
And as you indicated, it appears that our rule in draft 3 would prohibit LEAs for using chemical restraints. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And can I ask, the law, however, does permit the use of chemical restraints. Is that correct?
So in code, essentially, is our rule different than code? Is that what you're asking?
Right. Well, it's my understanding if we pass a rule, it has the force of law.
Mm-hmm.
So the current state of the law is that chemical restraints are permitted. Is that correct?
Can I pass this on to staff?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you.
So Ashley Lauer, I am behavior specialist on the student services team. And within the educational code, there is not code that speaks directly to chemical restraint. It speaks to physical restraint. So within the educational setting.
Thank you. And Chair, may I? Do we have any LEAs that are currently using chemical restraints?
Not that I am aware of. Within the context of the definition that we use here, I'm not aware of any LEAs that are using chemical restraint.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's continue on. I'm looking to. I think we're in that space of saying let's look at amendments, and I know that if we're looking at draft 2, I don't know, Member Lear or Member Wood, if we want to just start going through, or Member Carey, who wants to start this? But the meeting ends at 12:30, so let's get going. Member Wood.
I know we talked about moving from draft 2. I would actually move that we start with draft 3 because it has those. We're going to be here wordsmithing like crazy for a handful of things that are already there. Or did I say it wrong? Probably did.
Let's make a formal motion then. Since draft 2 was the one that we prepared for, we're going to make it a motion and then we'll vote on it and then go from there.
Okay. I would move that we approve draft 3 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay. Understanding. So the motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-608 prohibition of corporal punishment in Utah's public schools draft 3 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. I will make a comment on this because if we pass this, does that eliminate all of Vice Chair Carey's ability to, because we're passing it to the board. So we need to something along that lines, or else we need some sort of.
Well, at this point, people should bring their amendments forward.
Before we take a vote.
Right.
right? And so that's what I'm saying. I just don't want to vote on this right now and then say, sorry, Vice Chair Carey. So at this point, this is the motion that's on the table. So I'm going to open up to committee members any amendments that they would like to make. Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, just to speak to the motion and then I'll make my amendments. But again, I know the board has made an effort and is continuing to make an effort that these drafts get in much sooner. And, you know, as I'm scrolling through, there are several substantive changes. And to say I've got to address these on the fly seems there's a degree of inappropriateness to that given the weight of what we're discussing. So, but I understand that's not done intentionally, but I would think with something that's been being worked on for 9 months, it wouldn't take until the day before to pull this together. So with that, Deputy Newey, if we could turn to line 128, and this will be on draft 2.
Okay. Yes. So the definitions of mechanical or the references to mechanical and chemical restraint.
Well, this is draft 2.
Yep.
And it says that, and this appears to be under chemical restraint, not mechanical. And it says that prescribed by a licensed physician or other qualified health professional acting under the scope of the professional's authority. And so my first question is, who are we referring to when we say scope of the professional's authority?
So I will answer and then I will pass this on to staff.
And Deputy, I'm directing to you. If there's someone else who you would prefer to answer, feel free to do that.
Sure. One of the changes, so by striking this language in draft 2, it was because we were not quite sure what this intended to cover, and we were not seeing it in schools. And when it is in, for example, residential facilities, that is done under medical professionals under their own agency laws, not under education code or under education. So we cut all of this out for that reason because we were not sure, but
and so under draft 3, there would be no reference to this language.
There's no reference whatsoever.
There's no chemical restraint.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So we don't need that motion, but if we could turn to line 194 on draft 2.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it appears the language is the same. It says, if a public education employee, and that phrase is used again on lines 204 and several times, line 212, line 214, line 216. Why are we limiting this to a public school employee? I can see scenarios where an individual is performing services for the school, but is not an employee. Maybe they're a contractor. So my question is, why are we limiting the training? And it says, like, if a public education employee physically restrains a student. But what if that's a contractor? What if that's a teacher's aide who may not necessarily be an employee of the school? Would this proposed rule cover those individuals?
That is a great question. Do you guys want to take a first stab at that? I'm looking, this may just be as simple as changing public education employee to school employee because that is in the definition, is school employee.
And just no, I'm not asking for that at this point. I just would like to know if it was if there was intentionality behind limiting this to employees of public education or not.
Ashley Lauer, behavior specialist, student services team. So the code that it's 53G8302, and it actually uses the word school employee. So we could use that, but we were taking it from that. The public education employee language was language that was previously in our 277609 that was pulled over. So we could use school employee, and according to the definition, that would include others who are contracted. The definition that's in 609 that's incorporated into 608.
And what do you think is better in terms of for our LEAs, for our students? are we wanting to restrict this or broaden it in terms of definition, in your opinion?
That's a great question, and I think let me, and I might not fully answer the question that you're asking. So if I don't, let me know. So we had talked about how the language in that section talked about public education employee instead of school employee. And the reason why we left it that is because sometimes there may be a district employee who is maybe a behavior support specialist at the district level who may come in and be supporting a student who is exhibiting the behavior that would fall under the category of immediate danger, which is in the definitions. And so we had talked about, do we want to leave it at that? Because in that case, they may not fall under the definition of school employee, or do we want to change it to school employee? Hopefully that answered your question. I'm not sure that it did, but.
Can I follow up on, do you have a follow-up, Vice Chair Carey? Can I just ask, I mean, I get that we're dealing with public education. I appreciate that it says if a public education employee, if you have a caregiver or caregiver, and they're at the school with you. I mean, I know that there's times where schools will say, hey, you need to have somebody observe or stay with this child, right? As part of like a discipline something. If they physically restrain, is the school held liable? Like, let's say, I don't want to get into too much weeds here, but I work for an organization. Let's say I go in, I'm watching a child. The child needs physically restrained. I do that. The child sprains a wrist. Is the school responsible, or am I responsible as the daycare operator, care, whatever, right? Are we protecting the school here and the child? Is the school going to be in trouble by allowing non-public education employees to physically restrain? Where's the line there?
Chrisanne Lewis, Student Services Coordinator. I'm offering my opinion here, but I feel like we do want to protect both the student and the public education employees. Part of the reason I think that we have it worded this way is we are very careful. We want to be very careful to protect our kids. We don't want restraint to be used by people without the proper training under the proper circumstances. And we don't want, caregivers in the classroom typically providing that restraint when we have people who are trained to do that. Again, I don't know if that answered your question. Hopefully it did.
It helps. But I'm recognizing it has nothing to do with this anyway, so I'm going to back off.
Well,
Is that fair? So, Member Lear, then I think we're going to go back to
briefly
Vice
to
Chair.
that. I can't think of a situation, except maybe very rarely, and I guess some schools are different than others, but the people helping students would be paid education employees. There wouldn't be a grandma coming in to restrain a student, sitting with the student, even if that would be free as opposed to a very expensive aid. But in my experience, all the individuals serving students in classrooms are school employees or district employees.
Thank you, Member Lear. Let's go back to Vice Chair Carey.
Thank you. So I see that school employee is defined in 609. Where is the definition for public education employee? Because, and again, I'm really just trying to understand who is being protected and responsible under that moniker, public education employee.
There is, can I answer?
Yeah.
Sure. Oh, sorry.
Or
Ben
Ben
has
just
all
walked
the
up.
answers.
So yes,
It's
I
true.
mean, you could.
He's here to save the day. There is no definition of public school employee. And I have brought up 609. So that definition is right here on the screen that is referred to in 608. And so that would include a school teacher, a school staff member, a school administrator, or any other person employed directly or indirectly by an LEA. So I hear your question, and I think what may be the best way to cover all of those bases is just to make an amendment that we change public education employee to school employee, because it would cover all of the same individuals that we were intending to cover.
And again, I am not saying that is not my motion. And we have a month between if this passes today and the board meeting.
Yeah.
But I was just confused because I typically don't see public education employee in our rules. And so if there is a definition, I'd like to know what it is. And if there's not, and it makes sense, school employee, but I'm not requesting that change be now, because I think if it needs to be processed and thought through, it'll wait till the full board meeting.
Can we just make a note of that, staff? Appreciate that as we continue on and look to make sure everything lines up. Thank you. Vice Chair Carey, please.
Now, just out of strict curiosity, if I may, to Director Rasmussen, is there a definition of public education employee that you're aware of? Okay, thank you. And then lines 204 to 206. And again, this is draft 2. I'm hoping that it's the same in draft 3. 204 to 206 in draft 2. If a public education employee physically restrains a student, yes. It says that the public school employee shall provide documentation of the physical restraint to the LEA's ESI committee. And then above it, it says, the school shall immediately provide notification to the student's parents, the school administration, and then also in this certain situation to the ESI committee. My question is the documentation referred to on line 205? The same documentation that is referred to, that is provided to the parent on line 242.
Look at 242.
And
That's right. Yeah, so I would also explain that, so one of the components of the training that an individual has to have in order to use ESI is the proper process of documentation. And so they are trained in that process of documentation, and when it occurs, it has to be provided to the ESI committee or whoever is listed for the particular circumstance. And then that's the same documentation that is provided to parents upon request as required by this rule.
well, I don't think the initial documentation, I don't believe the parent has to request. On line 246, it says the parent, again, will be provided notice that the parent may request additional information.
Mhm.
But it's my understanding that if the physical restraint is for more than 15 minutes, that parent has to be provided the documentation. Is that?
That is correct.
Okay. And if it's the same documentation, would it make sense at the end of line 206 just to add, and the same documentation shall be provided to the parent?
So right now it says in line 231, hold on, I might be on the wrongs, but anyway, it talks about notice in that language and not documentation. So if we want to add a requirement for documentation, that would need to be added. That, sorry, I'm just up on line 231, Elise.
So is there
Are
both?
you on draft 2 or look at draft 2?
Oh, I'm on draft 2. So there's 2. So
There's 2. There's a notice here.
Mhm. So
And-
there's a notice to parents. And then in line 236 through 238, there's the documentation provided to the ESI committee. And then in lines 241, there's the documentation, the notification to the parent that the documentation can be, sorry, that's line 246, that the documentation can be requested.
Those clarification, Ashley. So lines 241 to 242, where it says, if a school employee uses an ESI, a school shall provide a parent with copy of any
Right.
notes or additional documentation.
I apologize. We added some language for that so yes, I apologize.
Oh,
yes,
no
it is the
apology,
same.
but I understand it. It came in late last night. I just want to make sure that I understand. If a physical restraint is used for more than 15 minutes, the parent will be provided the same documentation that the ESI committee will be provided. And if that's true, wouldn't it make sense to just say that rather than put that in a separate section of the rule?
Yes, and I think Board Member Hurt has a comment as well.
Mike,
Board
Member Hart.
I agree. But there's actually, I believe there's two pieces. When you provide notice, you might pick up the phone and just call, and then you follow up with the documentation when you're able to complete it, because when you're in the classroom, you don't always, you practically never have an opportunity to do all of the documentation right then, but providing notice to me indicates, and we can clarify the language, and I think it's appropriate that as soon as possible, you let the parent know the situation has occurred. Then you go back and you make sure that the exact documentation gets to the parent. What we don't want is for a teacher to stop handling stop handling a class to fill out all the paper. We want the paperwork to be clear, so they need time to do that, but they also need to be, 100% attentive to their class, especially if they're having situations. So I see the notices immediate or as immediate as possible, and then the paperwork to be the exact paperwork. And there are forms. I don't know if that would clarify it, but Member Carey, is that kind of where you're going with it?
Yeah, Vice Chair Hart, that's exactly why I think I'm making the motion, because it's just confusing. And I think we're conflating the notice provision with the documentation provision. And I think by eliminating the documentation provision and just combining it, it just makes it clear. That would be my take on it.
And I just want to make sure that both things occur.
Yes.
Member Lear.
But I think if I heard Molly correctly, she's saying that even though it in some ways makes sense to provide them simultaneously, providing notice is a phone call or a text. Providing documentation is a different experience.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they can't really they can't really be provided simultaneously.
No, he's saying put them in the same place in the bill. Rule to make it more clear. Like have one section on parent notification. One piece is notice, one piece is the exact documentation required that goes to the committee.
So let's get Vice Chair Carey to get a motion together.
Add one other kind of thought on that exact same issue. My understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that one of these is required under special ed law. Is that not true? Or is this just our take on what we want to do, regardless if the students are special education or not? I thought the difference is between SPED law and what what the board is now wanting to do in a rule. Am I making that up?
Staff, can you answer that for us?
There we go. So Ashley Lauer, board behavior specialist. All of this language was previously in R277609. So it still is a similar requirement. We did take the language. There were two different sections. There was a parent notification section specifically in R277609. And so we combined everything and put it into an implementation section. And there's Laura Lee will be speaking as well, I think. But the language, I think we could do what's being asked in putting that language. It would need to be done for both physical restraint and seclusionary timeout, but we could change the organization to make it more clear the steps that maybe need to happen.
I'll stop trying to differentiate the two and I just accept that it's going to be in the rule.
Yes.
I got to be red hot, right? It's Laura Lee Gillespie, the Program Support Coordinator for Special Education Services. And just to go to your question, it's reasonably, as soon as reasonably possible, to notify in terms of special education items, which would be consistent with what's in the rule.
Okay, but we're trying to expand this to all students, not just students under IDEA.
Correct.
That's where I think it's getting a little challenging.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Vice Chair Carey.
Yep. So I would just make this motion, and that would be in line 204, 2. And the language is the same in both, and the same lines. And the language that currently is there reads, if a public education employee physically restrains a student, the school or the public school employee shall provide documentation of the physical restraint to the LEA's ESI committee. And then I would add, and the parent. Well, no. The LEI ESI committee described, no, this is all there already, Elise. The LEA's ESI committee described in section 277-608-6 and the parent.
Let's keep an eye on the screen here. Make sure we have your motion as you'd like to see it.
212 draft.
Right. Is that correct?
It
So we
is.
have it in contact.
Yeah, nothing else has changed.
Okay.
Now that may require amendments to lines 241 and 245. It may, but I'm not going to get into that now.
Would you like to make a motion that staff be directed to make it consistent on lines 240, just consistent language?
You read my mind.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
And I would hope that we could just add that to the motion, right? Something along
Yes.
the lines of, and the word just slipped my mind, but make sure that the rule is consistent with the motion here.
And I just have a few more points, Chair. So I don't know if you want to vote on this or have me go through the other ones, whatever is the chair's desire in that.
Well, does this read how you'd like to see it? So is this the motion that the committee amend R27 if a public education, and then
It is.
and the parent? So at least the underlined is the new text. That's it. Is that correct? Yeah, Member Lear.
To you folks that are in the field, is adding this a significantly greater burden for the staff? Okay, thanks.
So I'm going to make we're just going to put this before the committee right now. So we're going to, the motion is that we add and the parent to the end of line or to the end of section 7 in R277-608, and that staff be directed to ensure that the rest of the rule is consistent with this new language. Discussion to this, Member Wood.
So I have an underlying motion that we work from number 3. and we were amending number 3. And so I realize his motions are coming to 2, but my underlying motion is to draft 3. So if we look at those lines, they're the exact same because there's very few major changes in draft 3. But if we work from draft 2, we're going to have to go word by word and wordsmith draft 2 to align with draft 3 if we want those changes.
So for this motion, and I may have, I can't remember if I mentioned a draft 2 or 3. This is why I mentioned R277608 section 7. So it is amendable in both drafts since we don't have any of them here.
That in his motion.
And that's fine. I don't think if we change the motion, I didn't read the motion as it was up on the board. Yes, section 7 of the rule. And then I'm not going to read all of it because it's in there on both drafts, but we are including "and the parent" for the motion, and that staff be directed to ensure that the rest of the rule is consistent with this new language. This is the motion, as far as I understand it. Is that meet what your intent is, Vice Chair Carey?
Yeah, and I have no objection if we, it does say subsection 7, yes.
Okay. All in favor of this motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes, and we'll continue on. Member Carey.
And this is it's a motion, but it starts as a question because I just want to make sure I understand what's happening. But when it comes to physical restraint, it appears that if the physical restraint is if the physical restraint occurs for more than 15 minutes, the school shall immediately provide notification to students, parents, school administrator. It goes through that list. But then when we go to seclusion, if a student is placed in a seclusionary timeout, the school or the public education employee shall provide notice as soon as reasonably possible. And then it goes through the same list. Now, it does say, I thought I read that if it was for more than 30 minutes, then notification would have to be immediate. Is that correct? And if you could point me to that.
Yes, so with the language on the board, if you go up just a little bit, Elise. So there's two provisions here, starting in line 226 through 230. That's when it's as soon as reasonably possible and before the student leaves school. And then line 231 through 235 is more than the 15 minutes. The immediate notification must happen to the school's parent and school administration. So we tried to parallel the language for physical restraint with seclusionary timeout.
And well, thank you for pointing that because I thought I read that. And I guess that's my concern, which is we're trying to make these parallel, but it's clear by reading the rule that these are progressive in terms of how the law is viewing each of these. Are they ESIs? And seclusionary is the last one. Like that's a measure of absolute last resort. But yet we're treating it as though it were the equivalent of physical restraint. Because the notification provisions mirror, the documentation provisions mirror that of physical restraint. But if this truly is the last remedy, the last possible avenue, shouldn't we be giving more protections to the student, the parent, the school? And Deputy, you can address that however you want to have that answered.
I was just going to say that there's a lot of language in here that is, the staff has taken all of the state statutes from across the nation. This is kind of a new newer conversation, I think, for us. And so they wanted to provide kind of what is the average response across states, and then as a board, you can decide to be more stringent or less stringent, or however you want to craft this rule. So I think that that's a policy decision that you are able to make today, how you want to address that.
Thank you. Chrisanne Lewis, Student Services Coordinator. I just want to provide some clarity that the intention of this is not to make them progressive. We want to make sure that restraint is also viewed as an intervention of last resort. That is not an intervention that should be taken lightly in the schools. We want to make sure that that notification is provided, and that the people who are providing those interventions are also trained. So the intention is not to imply that restraint is a less progressive or a less intense intervention than seclusionary timeout. We want to make sure that that's clear, that those both carry equal weight.
Isn't one substantially more invasive than the other? A physical restraint, I was told, could be putting elbow pads on a student. Are we equating that to seclusionary time?
Elbow pads on a student would not typically be considered a restraint.
You said, and again, I don't want to get into the whole lawyer, and I've been criticized for slipping into lawyer mode, so I don't want to do that. But let me ask you, you said you use the word typically.
Mm-hmm.
Can elbow pads be a form of physical restraint?
Those would be, depending on the circumstances, they could be considered a mechanical restraint, yes.
And we're going to treat that mechanical restraint, and we're going to equate that to seclusion of a student.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but when we're talking physical restraint, we are talking an individual limiting the motion of a student. We don't want to equate, of course, the mechanical restraint where a student may need elbow pads or elbow immobilizers, to prevent them from hurting themselves. That's not our intention to equate those. I think what we're trying to prevent is a person physically or people physically restraining a student. We want to be very, very careful that we're communicating that that is an intervention of last resort. Of course, we also want to be careful with the mechanical restraints, but those physical restraints, we're very worried about and want to make sure that those are covered within this rule.
So, and Chair, may I? Because I just want to understand, because as I was reading this, I looked at it as a progression. And you're saying that's not the way to read this, that USBE is considering physical restraints at the same level as seclusion. Is that understanding correct?
They're both considered the emergency safety intervention, so they're both considered only to be used in a circumstance of immediate danger, and a circumstance and as a last resort, as Chrisanne said.
Parallel.
You have a comment, Member Lear?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to understand. I'm also trying to. So these you're saying they're more of a choice, not necessarily one's a greater intensity than the other. I mean, that's what I've always thought of them as. Sometimes you need to restrain a student. Sometimes you can accomplish the same thing with a different student by putting them alone in a safe room. So is that what you're saying? It's not a progression, but rather a choice based on the circumstances. And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I just also want to understand.
Yeah, the circumstances and the context would be involved in determining if a physical restraint or a seclusionary timeout would happen.
Thank you.
So the flexibility is within the school itself.
Just as some clarification, I think it's dependent on the circumstance, because there may be more certain circumstances where a seclusionary timeout would be the safer option, and there would be certain circumstances where a physical restraint would be the safer option. And so that's according to the situation and the employees that are involved, that would be up to them to make that determination.
Thank you. Vice Chair Carey, do you have are we Did you have a motion on this one?
I
Okay.
will. I'm still trying to figure
Okay.
out, and I apologize, but if we could turn to, it appears to me on draft 2, lines 216 and 217, it says, if a public education employee uses seclusionary timeout, the public education employee shall, and then if you jump to 224, have used other less restrictive interventions prior to the use of seclusionary timeout. Would physical restraint be a prior less restrictive intervention if we're saying they're the equivalent?
No, I would not consider physical restraint as a prior less intrusive intervention. But when we're talking less restrictive interventions, I would consider those verbal de-escalation. There's a lot of interventions that can take place prior to this to help the student to regulate, to help the student to calm down. But physical restraint is typically not an intervention that's used to help a student calm. It's an intervention that's used only for safety as a last resort.
And we have a comment from Member Hart.
She said what I was going to say. The other thing is that physical restraint has many, many, many different degrees, I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm tracking this one too for my own learning and clarification. But physical restraint could be very minimal, or it could be, using proper techniques to pin a student down. Now you do it there's actually a science to it and a safety to it, and MANT training and other types of training exist, but there's a continuum. So you could be talking about redirecting a student a little bit, their body, or you could be talking about two people doing a hold that's very intense. So I think physical restraint has so many degrees that at some point, and the calming and the safety are two different issues as well. So you're trying to de-escalate, you're trying to calm, you're trying to keep kids safe, you're trying to keep other kids safe, and you're trying to do it in a safe way so that you are safe. So all those things make a continuum, but it's a couple different continuums based on safety and calm. So it can't be, and I understand what you're saying, and there are physical restraints that are just as that to me do hit the level of seclusion, but you do them for different reasons. But then there's physical restraints that are much less intense than seclusion. I don't know if that helps at all, but I understand what we're trying to clarify in the rule, and I do think it needs clarification. I'm just also struggling with how to clarify that.
Thank you, Member Hart. Let's go back to Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, just to remember what Vice Chair Hart said, and that's my concern. Because there's a spectrum of physical restraint, and I just looked up the code 53G301 on the definition, there's a spectrum of physical restraint. And my concern under this rule is if we're saying we're going to equate physical restraint with seclusion, are we making it easier for kids to be put into seclusion than less intrusive mechanisms of physical restraint? So remember, Vice Chair Hart, you said it much better, but that's exactly what I was trying to articulate, which is, but by equating these and saying these two categories are the same.
Yeah, and they're not, and I understand. I'm saying I understand exactly what you're saying, and I understand what we're trying to accomplish. we just haven't hit it exactly right. And I'm struggling. I'm agreeing with you.
Really quickly. Yep. Okay, and then Chair, I just have one other, and I don't have a motion on that because I was just trying to understand it, and then I'll work with staff in the before the board. But I have one final point.
These guys are anxious to comment, but if it's not necessary, then it's not necessary, but.
Can I just make one quick clarification? And that is with, so in 53G 8301, it also defines physical escort, which is a little bit more of what I think Board Member Hart was talking about with, the kind of helping a student get to where they're going. And so we've, in the rule as well, tried to distinguish between those two, to say, physical escort may be happening. That would not be considered an emergency safety intervention, but that physical restraint that is more intrusive is kind of what this rule is focusing on. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I just wanted to provide a little bit more information.
Yeah, and I read that too. And at first I thought, wow, physical restraint just means a temporary touching or holding of the hand. And I was like, oh, that can't be right. And then, but the next one does say physical restraint means a personal restriction that immobilizes or significantly reduces the ability of a student to move the student's arms, legs, body, or head freely. But again, it appears there's a spectrum under physical restraint that we don't see in seclusion. Either you're in seclusion or you're not, right? And that's my concern with this. Chair, I don't have any other questions, but thank you for the leeway in getting that additional information.
Thank you. So the motion before the committee then is that we're going to look at draft 3, right? We've seen some amendments that have been made to sections. Now, just for clarity, we worked from draft 2 because those are the lines that Member Carey had worked from, and this came in late. There's nothing against draft 3 or saying, no, we're not accepting draft 3. We wanted to be able to follow along. And so what I'd like to do at this point is we have the motion on the floor, and that is that the committee approve R277-608 prohibition of corporal punishment in Utah's public schools draft 3 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Now, I understand I'm always looking at the clock, but I don't think there's a whole lot of changes in draft 3, and I think it would help the committee if Member Wood or Member Lear would go through those changes, because similar to what Vice Chair Carey did, we understand better because he was able to go through those each one. So if committee members are willing, I'd like to hear from, again, either Member Wood or Member Lear, just to look at some of those changes so that we can all feel comfortable moving this forward to the board.
This is my understanding.
So if I'm looking at this, Member Lear, I'm looking on draft 3, the first changes on line 30.
And again, most of these changes were not mine. I just agreed to work with the staff to make this my draft. So they're not changes I've requested. I was very frankly sort of what's the word? Frustrated with this whole rule, because I feel like there's a conflation of what's already required in special education to all students. And so some of these definitions that I've understood for decades are now being applied to all students. And so I was just willing to hear the discussion, try and see how they apply to all students and move forward, but I wanted to be helpful to staff. And so I don't have any specific, that's a whole long story to say I don't have any specific amendments to propose to 608. I take it back. I have one that seemed that's again more structural than anything else. And other than that, I would defer. And Leanne doesn't have any either. Hers are on 609. So I think I'm ready, but I have one just structural thing that I can now propose.
And Vice Chair Carey, do you have a line for a question?
No, I just have one more motion on draft 2.
And can you just tell us the section number that you're looking at in draft 2, so we can equate that to draft 3?
Yes, this is.
Do you want me to make mine first, or do you want Joe to go first, and then I have
Either
just
way.
one thing. Okay, go ahead, Joe.
Section number. It's line 176. The heading is R277608-5.
That's great.
Okay.
Line 76, right? 176
is the heading line. But, my motion would be, and then I'd speak to it. But the motion is here on line 185. The use of physical restraint shall be for the minimum time necessary to ensure safety and a release criteria as outlined in LAA policies. And as I meet with educators, one of their top concerns is we're afraid to do anything because of the ambiguity in the law. And we see students fighting. We don't even want to get involved because we're afraid we're going to end up before UPAC. We're afraid we're going to end up in a lawsuit. And I think when it said they wanted clarification in the rule, I think part of that was helping educators understand when they could and when they shouldn't do certain things. And I'm not sure this rule, despite the many benefits of it, given the changes that were made, actually accomplishes that purpose. Because as an educator, I think they look at this and they still don't. They read this line and say, the use of physical restraint shall be for the minimum time necessary. Well, is that so you're holding a student and you ask the student, are you okay? Are you good? And the student says yes. And the teacher still continues to hold them because they think, right, that student hasn't exhausted their whatever issue is motivating the behavior. So they ask them again, and then the teacher releases them. I could see that being a violation of this sentence because, well, the minimum time would have been when that student said they were good. And why didn't you listen? Why did you hold them that extra 3 seconds? And so my amendment to line 185 would read, the use of physical restraint shall be for the minimum time necessary as reasonably understood by the educator or public school employee or public education employee. And then the rest of the sentence. But I think we have to give more clarity. I think we have to give more protection to our teachers, our educators, those individuals on the front line. And we can go back and forth on seclusion, and that happens. But I'm more concerned, I shouldn't say more, but I think what happens more often is not the seclusion, but it's the selection of which physical restraints are we going to use in this situation. And I don't think we're giving that clarity to the teachers and the LEAs. And I'm hoping that by allowing the educator to understand that if they act reasonably, it gives them more guidance than what we have here, which is the minimum time necessary, which I don't know how anyone makes sense of that particular definition. Thank you, Chair.
Can I ask staff before I go to you, Member Lear? This is quick. I don't see how it would conflict with anything else in the rule. Would this have a domino effect from your view of any other of the language?
Add really quickly, I do not think it conflicts, and I think it adds. I do think some additional protections, as you're talking about them, for the employees is that they're required in this rule is that an LEA has to have an explicit policy. So ours are kind of those guidelines. The LEA is required in this rule, as well as training. So this rule also requires that all teachers have training. And so with those two additional protections, we see that then educators are able to use that reasonableness, right, to act appropriately in each given unique situation. So I don't see that being in conflict with anything else.
Thank you. And Member Lear, do you have a comment to this?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
I'm resisting a larger philosophical discussion. So this is the short version of that. I don't think the problem is, having talked to many, many educators and been one of those educators, it's not so much that they don't understand. It's that we say these words, but then when we see the situation, either from an anecdote from a parent or on a hotline complaint, or maybe in a stronger UPAC case, then the teacher says, I did what I thought was reasonably necessary in that moment under the circumstances, and we say, oh, no, that's much too much. We're second guessing you. So I don't think it is that teachers we're not being as clear as possible in the rules. It's that we are not doing what we say we want to do and trusting their reasonable judgment when they're the person on the ground in the moment. So, and that's not something that changes in a moment either. So I think that if we really mean this, I'm fine with the language. I just think we have to mean it and then have our decisions in small ways and big ways reflect that decision, as opposed to saying it. We want you to act as the reasonable educator and then saying, oh, no, we're second guessing you, because that should never happen. We know. We've never been in a classroom, but we know.
Thank you. So the motion before the committee is that the committee amend R277-608. Again, I'm going to say by revising Section 5, subsection 3B to read, the use of physical restraint shall be for the minimum time necessary as reasonably understood by the school employee, ... to finish out the rest of that subsection.
If I could, I think just to be consistent, we just use public education employee. And I know that may be changed, but then at least we're changing everything. So if I could, it would just say public. Yes, way ahead of me. Thank you. And that would be my suggestion, Chair.
Okay, that's the motion. Any comment to that? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, let's move on. Vice Chair Carey? Yeah. Okay. I'm just double checking. Okay, let's move to Member Lear on a motion.
And looking at this, it seemed to me, again, a rather small thing. In the very beginning, I'm looking at draft 3. In the very beginning, it starts with parentheses 2. The purpose of this rule is to, and it seems like we should switch B and A. Direct LEAs to have policies in place that protect. And if you want to usually use the singular, I thought direct an LEA to have a policy in place that prohibits corporal punishment consistent with the law. And then A should follow, outline the required provisions of an LEA's written policy. That seems like that would be a more logical progression.
Can the committee switch those without concern? Give a second to. Okay, can we just get that switched? No verbiage changes, just switch the. Okay.
Just one more. So I do have some grammatical things. Oh, no, that's 608. 609. I do have a few grammatical things that I'll just pass on and
not just connect with staff
now. Yes.
Okay. If the grammatical changes change intent. Okay. Okay. We have again. Let's go back to the original motion. The underlying motion here, and that is that the committee amend, or that the committee, where's Member Woods? We are not going to do that motion, Member Lear motion. We're just going to be done with it. Is that okay? I think without it, yeah, there it is, without opposition. So we have Member Woods' motion up here before the committee. And that is that the committee approve R277-608 prohibition of corporal punishment in Utah's public schools, draft 3 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Vice Chair Carey has a question on draft 3.
Thank you, Chair. This may be addressed when we revisit the public education employee, but on lines 152 through 156 of draft 3, is this the operational, oops, sorry, no, take your time. Is this the operational definition of what we were trying to achieve in draft 2 when we said public education employee? Because, and this is why, because when we say school employee, this appears to define school employee in ways other than we've already done. And so that's why I'm saying this clearly is not the definition of school employee, because it says school employee and then has these limiting factors. So is this what we're trying to say our definition was when we use the term public education employee?
That's a good question. Do you want me to start, Elise? I know this suggested change came from some feedback that was provided by the in-house counsel group, correct? And it was just that there's certain employees who maybe don't have direct interactions with students who may not need this training. The intent was to have, I think, all students or all school employees who have that interaction with students to have this training, because we know, because we've been given information and had information that the challenging behaviors are becoming more challenging. So I think it does meet what we were hoping to meet with the definition of all school employees. I'm not sure that I fully answered your question, but I'll pass it to Elise.
I can add to that too. So the definition throughout the rule are like the prohibitions, right? We wouldn't want anyone, if you're a contractor and you come into a school, we would want that contractor to have the same prohibitions and requirements about how to keep a student safe. One thing that we got feedback from superintendents and council on was that it's not reasonable or not within the feasible for an LEA to have every single one of their individual contractors or their finance person who never leaves their office at the LEA to be trained in all of these things. And so the training is then restricted just a little bit more to anyone that ever interacts with a student. And so that was the reason that we want the protections to apply to everybody, but the training can be just if you face students at any point in your job description, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Sorry, I know you want to move on, Matt, but I did have this question written down and I forgot.
Let's do it.
So that would include coaches who are paid a stipend. So they're employees, they get a stipend. Would they get this training or not?
Yes, assuming that they are interacting with students.
And
yes.
I'm saying one of 20 football coaches interacting with students paid a stipend. That would be a requirement for those individuals as well. Great, thank you.
Okay. Member Hart.
Wait a minute. So are we saying in this section, are we saying that people like coaches are going to go through 2-day de-escalation and restraint training? I mean,
Staff will answer that, Molly.
Okay.
So there are 2 trainings in this rule. The first is what we're calling foundational behavior support training. That in draft 3 consists of behavioral emotional crisis management, including de-escalation strategies consistent with the LRBI manual, and what the LEA specific policy is related to ESI. So that is the one that is required for, or at least in this rule that is being proposed, would be required for all student-facing school employees. The additional training is for key identified school employees, and that would be things like the restraint, that would be things that are the upper tier level, and those are for key identified school employees. And we left that open for LEAs to define who those key employees are, because some LEAs, that may just be one person. If you're a very small charter school, if you're a really big LEA, that may be all of your paraprofessionals, but we wanted to give LEAs that flexibility to make that call on their own.
Can we
So-
go back to the first training?
So it would be A and B right here, as it is in this draft.
What are we envisioning that training to be like? Does anyone know?
Yeah, staff is gonna respond.
Yeah, so this would be really just foundational training on de-escalation strategies, on helping the employees know how to kind of understand foundational behavior concepts, and then supporting the de-escalation of students.
Okay, so, and this would be required annually? What is
In
the
the rule,
frequency?
it is biannually.
Okay,
So it's within the first 3 weeks of employment, and then biannually thereafter for the foundational behavior support training.
have we coordinated this with the board did I'm sorry, Chair, can I follow up?
Please.
We did some work to try to minimize and streamline and organize the trainings that teachers are required to do. Has this been coordinated with the people that are organizing those trainings as well?
That we have not yet had that conversation, but that is a conversation that we will have.
Okay. I'm a little concerned about this, to be honest. That's an extremely broad group of individuals to train every 2 years. And that's a huge lift in training. And so who would be eligible to do the training? Would it be a created training that is redelivered? Is it a Canvas thing through?
Go ahead, staff.
Yeah, we are currently developing a training that could be used to fulfill that training requirement. There also is some flexibility for LEAs to also develop that training. And we tried to leave it flexible for that reason, but also part of the conversations we've been having is that there are employees who are struggling with managing behavior, and that may be leading to some of the escalation. So the hope was, if we have more training happening and that foundational training happening, that we could support the decrease of using of emergency safety interventions.
And I agree. I concur. To me, the devil's just in the details, and I'm wanting to make sure that it's doable and it's done authentically. And sometimes when we have something that's big, it gets minimized. If we right size it, then there's a greater chance that there's actual meaningful implementation. I don't know if that makes sense, but oof. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so with that, Member Hart and committee, we've made motions. We spoke about two different drafts. We have draft 3 on the floor right now on the table to move forward. I guess, Member Hart, with your concerns, the two options that I see, and maybe you have different ones, is three options. We either move forward and do it as is. We move forward and committee members continue to work with staff if that's enough time before the board. I know it's the holiday season and people are busy, or we postpone.
Can I offer a suggestion?
Please.
Apologies. Member Hart, I just wanted to bring up that you are echoing many of the concerns that we've also heard from LEAs, right? That there's this balance between ensuring that all of their employees can be safe with children in their care, but also meeting all these training requirements. One option could be that, so we've left this open, and it could be that now that the rule is going through, that the committee direct us to work on that as staff to come up with that training and be sure to provide a training. We could also put in a date by which this needs to begin. So put this off until like next school year or the year after that, until we as an agency have something that we could provide them. Just a few options to, because you're echoing many concerns we've also heard. So.
Member Hart, thoughts? Is there any amendment to this motion?
I do like, well, I should have caught this earlier. I feel badly that I didn't. I feel like we shouldn't hold on. I feel like this should move forward, but I also feel like we need to spend a little bit more time on fleshing it out, either having a rubric of what has to be included if the district does it, have a training that's available that we really think through the implications of, where we put this training. I do like the idea of putting off the implementation because I really have a hard time with these rolling implementation dates. Let me think right quick. I do think it should go into effect, but do we put that in a rule? I'm sorry. When would be the effect of this rule?
Staff.
So if this goes through committee today and goes through in January, then it would go into effect like beginning of March.
Yeah,
if I can think of the calendar correctly.
Yeah.
So we could add a line just right here and say beginning with school year 2025, 2026, whatever it is that you want to say.
I would like to propose an amendment that adds beginning with the 2025-26 school year, comma.
And that clarification to Member Hart.
Go ahead.
Can I ask you a question about your motion?
Yeah.
That means, is that for the whole rule or just the training?
No, for the training, just the training piece. Because then LEAs get the rule goes forth, goes into effect. So to Member Carey's point, there's a little bit more guidance given to teachers on what is allowed. You know, the lane is clearer, but then the LEAs have time to come up with the training plan that makes sense and that works and could actually be implemented authentically.
Okay, Member Hart. So hopefully you can see the
yeah, I can see it.
here.
Thank you. It is correct.
Your motion is that the committee amend R277-608 section 4 subsection 1 to add beginning with the 2025-26 school year.
Are you looking up the line, Deputy Nui? at the beginning of line. Yes, there you go.
Any discussion to this motion? Seeing none, let me just restate to make sure. The motion before the committee is that the committee amend R277-60841, line 154, to add beginning with the 2025-2026 school year at the beginning of that line. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay,
And
that
now,
passes unanimously.
oh,
Go ahead, Member Hart.
and now can we give staff some direction on what they need to have ready for LEAs, some resources for that training, some I'm pretty sure they're going to do it anyway, but I just want to be really clear about what LEAs need to be able to do this. And that is, I'd like to, I don't think it's an amendment. I think, well, okay, I'll bring it
Well,
up
go
later
ahead and
then,
give your-
because I just realized it's
Give-
not an amendment to the rule.
Give your direction. If it's a consensus of the committee, then we'll push it on. If not, then it's going to be your own work.
I would like staff to create a model training inclusive of a rubric of required elements for LEAs prior by, oh geez, now I need to know if staff can do this or if it's a unrealistic expectation by May 1st.
Can I just add, we're currently working with a contractor to develop this training. It's already in process, so I don't think that date would be unreasonable.
Oh, good. If they didn't leave or quit or cry, then I'd like to have it done by May 1st so that districts can plan their summer and fall training prior to leaving the school year this year.
Molly, if the training is already in progress, do we need to direct staff to create the training?
No, I just wanted it to be clear. Thank you.
Okay. Member Lear.
Is what you're asking staff to do, or is what we're asking staff to do, would that include helping them identify the appropriate employees?
Oh, that's good.
Is that, and that's a question to Molly's semi-motion as well as to staff.
I didn't include that simply because I already know that they will, but if we want to make that explicit, that makes sense.
I just think that they will not think of the contract employees, the stipend paid employees,
Right.
As employees, which they really are.
I do think
So
that
I would like that part.
I think that would be
Thanks.
appropriate guidance.
Thank you.
Okay. Staff, do you know what you're doing?
We need a motion, so.
So there is direction to the staff to create a training with a rubric specified to specific employees that will be affected. Does that sound right, Member Hart?
Yes.
Okay. And committee, I think we're have a consensus that we agree that would be very helpful. So.
Can I just clarify that the rubric of required elements would be for districts that choose not to use the model training? Because I am concerned that there are districts that will do first of all, the LRBI is an excellent resource and they should create their training around that. I know that that's already said in the rule. We need to ensure that everybody's being trained on the right things if we're going to hold them responsible for that in the end. And that's why that rubric is separate from the training. So even though a district might use.
And you mean LEA? LEA, do you mean LEA, Molly?
Yeah, yes, I do. I'm sorry. Yes. So even if they choose to use their own training, they still have to meet the elements of the rubric. Does that make sense?
Yes, so we're getting some head nods from staff.
Okay. Thanks.
Let's jump to our underlying motion. And that is that the committee approve R277-608, prohibition of corporal punishment in Utah's public schools, draft 3 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. We could also include the previous direction, but I don't know if there's a need. Okay, we're on it. Okay. With that motion, committee members, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
That sounds unanimous. Any opposed? That is unanimous. Okay. Thank you, staff. We are going to take a quick 5 minutes. We don't have 5 minutes, but we're going to do it anyway. We'll be back here. Sorry, 4 minutes, 11:15. I'm going to start. So if you want some stuff, get here at 11:15. All right, thank you, members of the public, committee members, for allowing that brief break. We're going to switch up the agenda just for a second. We had to have staff go to another meeting. Here with us, we have Ben Rasmussen, and he's going to help us with agenda items 3.7 and 3.8. So we're going to jump to 3.7, 3.8, and then we'll circle back to 3.5 and 3.6. So 3.7 is R277-489, kindergarten programs and assessment. And this is a repeal. Ben will tee us up.
Let me just get the up really quick.
We'll just wait while we get that on the screen.
489.
Yeah, R277-489. This is agenda item 3.7.
So Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. Good to be with you this morning. This is a rule that if you look at the very end of the rule, you'll see language that says that the rule sunset. And for some reason, it's not changing tabs on me. Okay. The rule sunsets by its own terms on June 30th, 2024. So we basically need to repeal the rule to carry into effect the sunset provision. So that's what's happening there. We just need to repeal the rule.
Thank you, Ben. Any comments or concerns? Seeing none, I'm going to put forth the motion here. I move that the committee repeal R277-489, kindergarten programs and assessment on first reading, and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading. Seeing no additional lights or comments, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. On to agenda item 3.8, R277631, student toilet training requirements. And again, we have Ben to tee us up.
Okay, so there are two drafts that you can look at here. So you may recall that staff had plans to bring this rule back for what is in draft 2. And you'll see that that's just a small change that's on lines 34 and 35. There was misapprehension in the field based on how we had worded that. Basically, if a student has a disability and has a toilet training issue, an LEA should not and legally cannot block that student from enrolling. And so we wanted to clarify that. And that's in draft 2. You'll see the recommended change there. An LEA shall enroll a student who's not toilet trained if the student's lack of toilet training is a result of a condition addressed by an IEP or Section 504 plan. At the same time, and during last month's board meeting, there was a robust discussion over whether there should be background check requirements if parents or their designees come into the schools to assist with toileting students who are enrolled but still have toilet training issues after the fact. The board directed staff to bring this back for discussion on that element as well. Staff is not recommending any language on that. However, board member Bogus has submitted a proposed draft which would address some other issues in response to that. That is draft 3. She has added a few changes throughout, but I will just highlight that in her draft, she recommends adding line 54, that there be a requirement that restroom assistance occur in a private restroom. She also recommends a background check requirement that an LEA shall adopt a policy requiring a background check for a parent's designee that would be entering in public multi-stall restrooms for the purposes of aiding in toilet training. Also includes a provision on passing along the cost of that background check to the parent. So the committee can go with either draft 2 or draft 3, or if the committee wants some amendments to one or the other, happy to help facilitate that. That's where we stand.
Thank you, Ben. Member Lear.
I just feel like I appreciate what I like Member Bogus's draft. I just struggle with lines 57 on. I think that would be great if every designee had a background. I think it would be fine if every designee had a background check. But those designees are sometimes needed unexpectedly. And to set up LEAs with this kind of a requirement that we know is not going to be satisfied is, I think, just a fool's errand. So I don't know how to change it exactly.
Can I offer?
Sure. I just would like to have something that, yes, it would be nice, but we're not going to seek them out in an audit.
Yeah. Can I offer a potential amendment here?
Sure, I'm just with 554 not address what you're trying to do.
It could, yes. So, will you, I don't know how fast you could throw that up on the screen. I just text
Let me
Ben
put
for
it in here.
the committee's, notification. I just sent him a text of a potential verbiage here. And what I'm proposing, instead of adding a section 4, is adding a subsection 4 to section 3. So it would be R277-631 section 3 subsection 4 would read what Ben is typing. I would also, Ben, I didn't get this in there. I asked staff in an earlier meeting if every school has a private restroom. And they said there was one instance where they said that they didn't know if they didn't believe there was a private restroom in there, but they had what was called a cleared restroom, if that's common verbiage or common term. So I would also put occurs in a private or cleared restroom. And one of the things I'd like to do here, background checks are difficult, and you never know when toilet training you're going to need help with that. And so stopping that process to say, hey, make sure you have a background check, that could be a challenge. Two, regardless of if there's a background check or not, we want to protect as much as we can the integrity of the child. And so to have them in a private or cleared restroom would, in my thoughts, be best practice for that child and family at the same as well. So this is what I
would this be amending draft 2 or draft 3?
Either one. So draft, I think we're on draft. Well, we haven't even talked about drafts. You're right, Ben. I'm jumping ahead here. So I guess we asked the committee, what draft would you like to work from? From draft 3? Are we okay with draft 3? Member Hart, you okay with draft 3? Well, we hit that mute button again. I think we're just working from it. We're not passing it. We're just saying.
Yeah, I don't have a preference.
Okay, and Member Wood, I think you're okay. So yeah, Ben, let's work with draft 3. And with that, then my amendment would be to remove lines or replace lines 54 through 60 with the suggested verbiage.
Okay.
Could you now go back once you're done? Could you go back to the 54 through 60? Thank you.
Vice Chair Carey.
No, and this may be a friendly amendment to your line 54. And we refer to toilet training throughout the rule. And I'm not sure if you intentionally wanted restroom assistance instead of student toilet training, which is.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'd rather be consistent with the rule, so it's a good catch. If we can just update that. So it would read.
Requirement that student toilet training assistance.
Yeah. Does that make sense, Ben? Whereas we have you jump all over the place. Member Hart?
Yeah, I just wanted to explain why I don't support background checks for this, because of the emergency nature of, needing someone to get to the school, and maybe a parent or a guardian is not available. So they have us they call grandma, aunt, and then they let us know who the individual is that's coming. I have no interest in stopping them at the front door and saying, I don't have your background check, as long as they're going to a private restroom. Now, if it was going to the regular restroom, I understand. But since we're putting the private restroom in there, then I think that provides the safety that we're looking for. Now, volunteers are already expected to be background checked. And so if this person, it would be reasonable that schools would ask somebody that's coming regularly to go through the volunteer approval process. And so I can see where, if it's a regular person, like it's always going to be a babysitter, then that's when they would qualify as a volunteer, which already has these protections.
Right. Thank you. Vice Chair Carey?
Yeah, I would speak in favor of the amendment. I think this accomplishes the intent of what Member Bogus was looking for, and I think it does so in a much cleaner and concise way. And I just saw the provision that not only would we require background checks, but then we would pass that cost along to the parent. I mean, we have a work session today on student fees. I can only imagine the pitchforks and torches if we tell a parent that's going to be $40 to use the bathroom. So I'd rather forego that. Right, there we go. We could fundraiser, just serve a lot of water and then. So I think this is a great compromise, and I think it accomplishes the same thing. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments to this? This is just an amendment, so let's vote on this real quick. The motion before the committee is to amend draft 3 to strike lines 54 to 60, add after line 53 a subsection 4 stating an LEA shall ensure that toilet training assistance for a student who is not toilet trained as provided under subsection 3D occurs in a private or cleared restroom. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, any other thoughts on this? I do have one more if the committee's willing to hear me for another few minutes. On line 30, Ben, can we pull up line 30? I genuinely like a good thought and discussion on this. It is recommended in draft 3 that as determined by an LEA is removed. Yeah, just this one, 29 and 30. My thoughts, I have different thoughts on this. I would prefer to keep this verbiage because I don't know who determines what sufficient frequency to impact the educational experience of the student or their peers means. And so I would leave that determination up to an LEA rather than just leaving it out there. Member or Vice Chair Carey.
And then Vice Chair Hart, but I would just like to know why the recommendation was moved to remove the language.
Ditto.
If you know.
I can kind of give, I don't know, I mean, we don't typically call other board members here. This was something that Board Member Bogus suggested, and I think she wanted a more centralized response to LEAs so that there was more clarity saying, okay, this is what it means. But there was nothing offered in that to say, well, who does determine it? If the state determines it, and this is what I asked her, if the state determines it, where is it in the rule, right?
Right.
If the SEA is going to do it, where is it in the rule? And then the other question is, we're talking about local control here and taking that away. Is that what we're trying to do? And so obviously you can see in draft 3, there's not really a consensus there. Maybe there's an answer out there, but until then, I believe that it should be determined by an LEA. Okay, so the motion before the committee is to reinsert. Oh,
question.
go ahead, Member Wood.
Should that be LEA or school? Because in a charter school, yes, they're going to be defining it, but is the district actually going to get into the weeds of what's happening in a school about a single student?
That's a great question. And what I would defer there is, because this was inserted by staff and removed by a board member, I might defer to staff to respond as to what their thoughts are, but let's go to Member Hart. Do you want to respond first, Member Hart?
Yeah, I prefer it to be the LEA, and then the LEA can then, in their own policies and procedures, determine whether or not they give that authority to the schools. But in my view, we need to hand this particular one to the LEAs to decide how they're going to determine that, because the complaints that would theoretically come because of concerns about this would go to the LEA most likely. And I think they need to reserve their authority to determine their procedures. This isn't a case where I think the school community needs to make that decision.
Additionally, I don't think it's, and I could be wrong, I could be missing something. It's not typically in our practices to go into the school level. As an SEA, we typically turn it to the LEA. Member Lear.
I really don't want to belabor this, but so long as an LEA understands, that doesn't mean it has to be made by an LEA. That could be delegated. That's why I was sort of thinking LEA or school, but I'll go with LEA if our message is, you decide, you LEA decide who, I forget even the main issue. I'm just always a fan of local control, and the more local, the better.
Okay, thank you. So the motion on the floor is that the committee reinsert as determined by an LEA on line 30 of draft 3. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously. Okay. Any other motions or comments on the Vice Chair Carey? Go ahead.
Incorporate the IEP language from draft 2.
Staff says, oh, you are not. The question was, did we incorporate the IEP and 504 motion into draft, from draft 2 into draft 3? And the answer was yes. Okay. Any additional motions, final motions on this rule? Let me give it. I move that the committee approve R277-631 student toilet training requirements draft 3 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Seeing no other lights, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Molly's got it. There it is. And that aye for me, that passes unanimously. Are we ready to go back to 609 to agenda item 3.5? Elise is not back. No. Let's start with, do we have Chrisanne and Becca? All right, committee members, be kind. We only have 33% of the staff here. Okay. Just jumped to 67%. All right. This is agenda item 3.5, R277-609, standards for LEA discipline discipline plans and emergency safety interventions. This is the incorporated document, not the rule itself. We have, who do we have? Becca and
Chrisanne Lewis, I'm the
You are
Student
Chrisanne.
Services Coordinator.
You are, okay. Would you like to, I don't know if you guys can tee us up for what's happening here, then we'll turn it to committee members to ask questions.
Yeah, so Becca Ray, Prevention and Behavior Specialist. All of these updates that were made within the LRBI are kind of due to both 608 and 609 changes. So, for example, in Chapter 1, we updated the vision, the USPE vision. In Chapter 2, we updated the inclusion definition to match R277328. Chapter 3, those changes are going to be due to House Bill 347, so the Ed Rights amendments. And we also added some information regarding threat assessment. Chapter 7, those changes are due to the changes we made in R277608. And then the appendix, we just updated some definitions. So that's just kind of an overview of what you'll see throughout the manual.
Okay. So this is on the manual. Committee members, do we have any amendments, questions, motions? Member Wood.
Just a quick question on the vision and mission graphics. Those are actually the old ones. I see you added the new language and text, but the graphics are still the old one. So I could just recommend that's that technical change of updating the vision, the graphics also.
Okay. Member Hart.
Does anyone else, I'm wondering if anyone else has indicated that they have anything for this particular motion?
Not yet. I know there's motions on the rule, and let me ask.
But
when we talk, usually we talk about the rule, then, or maybe I'm getting something mixed up. But is this going to change after we discuss the rule?
So that is kind of tricky with how these three kind of interconnect. So there are some changes just in this last few minutes that in the discussion for 608 are going to impact that will need updated. So for example, the foundational behavior support training that we discussed, that is discussed in Chapter 7. So there would need to be some tweaks there. I saw on the most updated draft 3 of R27609, there was a proposal to change the definition of classroom management, which would impact the definition that is outlined here in the LRBI, since that's pulled from the LRBI. So it's kind of interplaying all three.
So would it be in the best interest of the committee to move to the rule first? Would that help? Would that be best for staff? You guys are gonna, if we vote on this, you're gonna change it anyway. Is that what I'm hearing? So I'd hate to spend 30 minutes on something that's not gonna matter.
the problem is that they aren't going to be able to change update the LRBI on the fly, I don't think. So it's going to have to come back. That's kind of, I was going to suggest that we approve the changes and allow them to make those changes. And then, you know, I just think the LRBI just keeps coming back as changes are made. And the reason for that, I want to explain. I use this, and I want to put on the public record, that LRBI is an amazing document, and it's one of 2 or 3 documents that I keep at a fingertips length. And so it needs to stay updated and well written. So I'm an LRBI fan, and I like that we keep it updated, but I don't want to hold on updates. I just am totally fine with it coming back regularly to stay as current as possible.
Member Hart, can you put that in the form of a motion?
Yeah, I was, well, if you would just
motion.
show me the motion, I was going to read it.
Okay.
I move that the committee approve R277 609, incorporated by reference document, least restrictive behavioral interventions, LRBI, technical assistance manual, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. And I already spoke
Thank you,
to why
member.
I think we should do that.
Well, as you should, and I didn't mean to like call you out, and I just was, I didn't know
No,
if your
yeah,
motion was going to be different. Okay.
I appreciate it.
So the motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-609 incorporated by reference document, least restrictive behavioral interventions, technical assistance manual, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading, with the understanding within the committee that this is going to change.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing no lights or comments, are we ready to vote on this, or do we want to process for a second? Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, and I understand the logic. I'm just going to vote against it because I'm not in favor of voting for a document that hasn't been finalized yet. But I understand the process. I'm not against the process, just the notion of how we're proceeding. Not that I'm critical of that either.
No, you're good. Member Wood.
Can we move this forward without approving? Because I have the same concerns. We're kind of given a blanket approval, knowing that things will be. Is there a way to? Because I don't want to stop process, but I agree with Member Carey.
Yeah, Member Hart.
So my thought is what the changes that were made in the LRBI are decisions that we already made. They're not decisions that we're talking about right now. Is that an incorrect assumption? Like, she told us what those were, and those were based on decisions that we already made. Is that incorrect?
Please, staff.
Really quick, are we discussing draft 1 or draft 2? The overview that I did give you guys was on draft 2. And so that would be an important note for the motion as well.
And those
You just threw a wrench in things because I don't see a draft 2 in backup. I guess there's a summary of public comment and feedback for draft 2, proposed LRBI technical assistance
There it
manual.
is.
Is that what it is?
draft 2.
Is that the proposed LRBI? Okay. Oh, the rule is the draft 1. I see. Thank you. I'll take the wrench back out.
So my motion only stands under the assumption that the changes were made based on what we already approved. If that's not true, if the changes also include what we're talking about, then I need to withdraw my motion.
Staff comment to that or response? Hi, Elise. Welcome.
Sorry. Elise doing policy. My question is, are we on the incorporated document? I apologize.
Yes.
Have we done the rule 609? Okay, so typically we do the incorporated documents first, right? Because the changes are made there and we want to make sure that we include them in incorporating in the law. However, in this situation, the only changes that are being proposed for the manual, the incorporated document, are changes that reflect the changes in rule. So it may be better for the conversation to have the rule conversation first and then do, if that's okay with this committee.
I withdraw my motion.
I believe it is. Yeah, thank you, Member Hart.
I withdraw that.
Okay. Yeah, and we're glad that you said that. So let's now jump to, we're going to come back to agenda item 3.5. Do I need to do anything special, Ben, to say we're going to move from 3.5 to 3.6? Okay, it's done. We're now on 3.6. We'll circle back to 3.5 afterwards. 3.6 is R277-609, standards for LEA discipline plans and emergency safety interventions. And we've got Elise Newey to tee us up.
All right. Elise Newey, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. So we have, similar to Rule 608, if you remember that conversation, we had a draft 1 ready for you in November. This committee voted to move this into December to incorporate feedback from the field. So that feedback is incorporated into draft 2. That is the one that we had ready to go. And then we received more feedback from board members and from superintendents, and that board member would incorporated into a draft 3 that is in backup. So we can have a similar conversation. There is nothing in draft 3. You can see all the changes from draft 2 and draft 3 in draft 3. So if you pull that up, we could see that, or we can work from draft 2, whatever is better for this committee. I will bring a couple of conversations that I would love to highlight for you all today. So 6 and 9 is the discipline, what is required of LEAs to have in their discipline policy. It used to incorporate emergency safety interventions, but as you just voted on 608, that is now being moved to 608, so it has its own kind of rule and space to be fleshed out. So now 609 with these changes would be just about what is required for an LEA discipline policy. One of the conversations that we would suggest that you think about is the monitoring aspect of both 609 and 608. So right now, both of these rules do not really have a monitoring component. These are what we would categorize as a level 2 in the oversight category, meaning that the resources and the statutory requirements are not really there for us to do extensive monitoring as an agency. There are things that we are required to require of LEAs, but not that we are required to monitor in statute. And so things like the training that we discussed with 608, we are requiring that of LEAs, but there is no component in either of these rules that requires monitoring. So if that's okay with this committee, then these rules stay as status quo. If you would like to move it up to a category 3 where we do more intensive monitoring and collecting of data, then that is a board decision. But that would probably require at least more resources or direction for our staff and potentially statutory support or changes that would support that decision as well. Did I capture that? Okay. A couple other things in this one. There was a lot of confusion between policies and plans. So in draft 3, you'll see that all of references to plans have been pulled out. So, well, at least an overall plan. Rather, there is now an expectation that LEAs just implement best practices when it comes to positive behavior interventions and those kinds of supports and plans in their LEAs and in their schools. So rather than requiring a written plan, we're requiring that they implement those things, if that makes sense. So that's one change between 2 and 3 that might be helpful to highlight. Additionally, another change between drafts is the definition of expulsion. This is one that we've gotten a lot of questions about there. This is a really interesting topic, both nationally in this area, as there's not a consistent definition of expulsion, something we use a lot, but isn't really defined. And so initially, we had written that expulsion means a disciplinary removal from school for more than 10 days without an offer of alternative education service. So we got feedback from a lot of superintendents that some LEAs actually have definitions that are different than that in their individual policy. And so in order to accommodate that and to make sure that LEAs have that local control, we changed our definition. So you'll see in drafts 2 and 3, expulsion means a disciplinary removal from school for a fixed or indefinite period without an offer of alternative education services that has been reviewed and approved by LEA administration. So that has 3 components that it is for a period of time. It can be fixed or indefinite. There is no offer of alternative academic services. So that means that they're not doing online education. They're not doing packets at home. Those are not being offered. If they were offered, that would be a suspension under our definitions. And then finally, that it is reviewed and approved by LEA administration. So this isn't just a teacher's decision or even a principal's decision. This would be an LEA decision. So that's something to highlight that we've gotten a lot of feedback on. Another one is, so if we go to line 178, Ben, sorry, I haven't been referencing the lines. that for some, this kind of gets back to that monitoring piece and how you want to go as an elected body, is one policy, one discipline policy that includes all of the statutorily and rule required components is easy to monitor. It is easy to say, hey, LEA, give us your discipline policy. And then our staff can review that for all the required components. However, practically speaking, that's not always feasible. We've gotten a lot of feedback from superintendents that, you know, they have an alcohol and substance abuse policy, they have a bullying policy, and that putting them all into one is unwieldy and not useful for schools. And so for the sake of clarity in this rule, we have discipline policy referred to. However, in two sections of this rule, both in the definition of policy, discipline policy, and on lines 178 through 180, it states that an LEA can have these provisions, these required provisions in more than one policy, and that still meets the legal requirement. But that does, again, going back to the monitoring question, would require more resources on our end to be able to monitor that if that's what this body chooses to ask staff to do. That makes sense. There's a lot in here, so I don't know if it's better to answer questions or to keep going through changes.
I guess I'll leave it to the committee. I know the committee has read through this and they have questions where they have questions. Would you like at least to keep going, or do you feel prepared to begin?
Question for Elise.
Yeah, Member Lear.
In that last change, and I don't want to mess with this if you feel like this is the understanding of the LEA leaders you've talked to. Their understanding that their definition has to be consistent with the code. Is that has to be consistent with the law? Is that your understanding from them? They maybe have some differences about them, but for instance, there's a requirement that if a student's expelled, the LEA shall review that with the parent every 45 days.
Yes.
So they understand that those things have to be consistent with law. Yeah. Okay, then I think it's fine stated as is. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Member Hart?
Yeah, this whole notion of oversight for this particular issue is perplexing to me, because I report my discipline policies to, it seems, a plethora of people in a number of ways. They go to the school community councils or the land trust council, whatever you want to call, refer to them. They go in several grants. They go on the civil rights reporting. They go, it just seems like, everybody wants the discipline policies. And I don't know that I have a question in here more than I have just I'm just perplexed. I hope this streamlines some of those expectations. Was there an effort to be made to look at those other places that discipline policies are required so that we could just refer to them? Or is that what this is trying to solve? Or do we need to do more work in that area? I don't know.
It is a big question. It is perplexing. But if I might start the answer and then pass this over to staff to hear their thoughts. So this rule just governs these required discipline policies and how our agency interacts with schools, right? So there is, for example, in land trust, I think it's your positive behavior intervention plan or something that has to be approved by the school community council, right? And that would be in a separate rule and a separate statute, I believe. OCR as well, those requirements are outside of our purview, right? And so I think that's the question that staff is wanting to answer. Does this body feel like all of those disparate things are enough or does this body also want our staff to monitor, right, in addition? Do you want to?
Yeah, so that's kind of the discussion that we want to have, is what level of involvement we want USBE staff to have in the schools. Originally, the current draft that's published of 609 does have the monitoring aspect, and that's kind of why we ended up here. The goal was to clarify and clean things up for our LEAs so that it's not as convoluted what is required of them. But the monitoring aspect is really the discussion that we would like to have.
Member Hart, you have a follow, oh, we have one more. Go ahead.
And then if I could just, I'm Tanya Alberno's coordinator for prevention. If I could just add some context, just some quick context, as I oversaw this previously. What happened in the past is that the board had indicated a strong desire to have those discipline policies submitted to staff to review. And that was incorporated into the enhancement for at-risk students grant process. So whenever an LEA would apply for those funds, they would have to submit their discipline policy. When we did away with the EARS enhancement and put that into the at-risk add-on, a part of the WPU, that requirement for LEAs to submit their discipline policies went away. And so we do not currently have LEAs submitting their policies to us. However, the requirement is still in statute, and I would have to find where that requirement is. It is a requirement in statute that it's submitted to us. We do not currently have a process for that. So that's part of this conversation as well.
Thank you. Member Hart, do you have a follow-up? Or?
That is exactly, and I'm appreciative that you're there, because those were the details that I was trying to express, but what didn't. Isn't there a way we could cross-reference this so that, or look at what we do have to submit to, at the very least, what we already have to submit? Can't we have it in the same form so that, or the same kind of report, so that I can just find it twice and submit it and not have to redo it? It's just so frustrating.
Yeah, so, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this rule encompasses so much, as you can tell in section 4, all of these different policies that are required in statute. And so that is kind of the difficult aspect of monitoring that comes with this, is there are different pieces that are being submitted to different entities. And one discussion that we've been having, for example, R27608 falls under this umbrella of 609, for example. And so there's been discussion about monitoring emergency safety interventions. And so looking at what level we want USBE to be in monitoring the use of those, but then that also impacts all of these other requirements that are within 609 and the statute as well.
Thank you. Committee members, again, looking at draft 3, any other comments, thoughts, amendments, motions? Yeah, Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, Chair, on draft 3, I do have a few motions on that. To start them. So if we go to line 35. Before teach behavioral, I would just like to insert the phrase promote academic excellence, comma, and then flow into teach behavioral, social, and emotional skills to all students. And I was going to say, yeah, and that works too. If we want to just create a new B to separate it from the BSE components. But I think part of classroom management should be the promotion of academic excellence. Oh, I would just add a new B, promote academic excellence.
Okay. So the motion before the committee is that the committee insert at line 35 a new subsection B, which reads promote academic excellence. Is there any objection to this? Hearing none, let's keep moving forward.
Okay, and the next one is line 101, or actually 102, and this is a question. It says the grounds for suspension or expulsion described in section 53G205, including disruption. And I just wanted to know, has disruption been defined in rule or code? It looks like you guys were expecting that question. So I thought I was being original, but you're all.
This is my favorite question. I was waiting.
Okay.
So a little background. In our code in the state of Utah, the grounds for suspension and expulsion are called disruptive student behavior. Now, the list of things that can fall under disruptive student behavior can be everything from physical violence to talking out of turn in class, right? Like it is a huge umbrella. And that is fine for a code. However, that creates a lot of confusion when it comes to our data collection and the way that this gets implemented in the classroom. For example, if I am a school who is doing their data, their reporting, right, from their ESI, and they say, what was the, behavior that happened right before you used an ESI, and I say disruptive student behavior, that could be legally correct. Yes, because that umbrella is so big that could have included a lot of really unsafe, dangerous behaviors. However, for a data collection, we don't know at a state level or at a federal level, are our schools using these ESIs correctly and ethically and safely, or are they using them for students talking out of turn, right? That is not clear in the data that we're getting. And so our goal in changing this language, we changed our rule to say, instead of disruptive student behavior, prohibited student behavior, as step one in several steps that we would like to take to clear up this data collection issue. So step one would be to clarify this in rule and say prohibited student behavior, and then go to the legislature and ask them for a similar change in statute so that we're no longer conflating disruption with any behavior that is prohibited. Now, to get to your actual question, I apologize for that. We could take out including disruption. We just include that as clarification because so many schools, that had been a conflation for so long that we just wanted to make sure it was clear that it still includes disruption, but that is no longer the umbrella term we are using in our rule.
And I understand the need for it. And because so many schools are still using it, I think it would be unwise to just remove it right now. But is 609 just concerned with ESI behavior? It's everything, right, in the classroom now. Okay. And that was just a question, Chair, no motion. And then if we go to line 23, 123, excuse me.
Can I make a
sorry.
point about that? Just remember, Carrie,
Sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is also something that we need clarity on because we are expected to set levels for our early warning systems. And it's going to be really hard to do that without defining disruption, because you've got disruption, you've got horseplay, you've got there's another word in there, disrespect often shows up in lists of characteristics. So I'm just echoing the need to clarify. I like the prohibited word because that means that it had to be defined in an LEA's policy. So it has to have been something that was described somewhere and prohibited in order to be counted. So I support that change, and I understand why we can't all the way take out distributed or disruption, but I think it's absolutely necessary for for multiple reasons, and I support that change.
Is there a change made? I know we talked about it. I don't know if Vice Chair Carey made a suggested change
No,
or if we could.
I like what's there where it says.
Oh, you're at, okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Sorry.
No, you're
Okay, Vice Chair Carey, go ahead.
So line 123. And so line 121, we talk about restorative justice program. And that was defined as noted here on line 22 in the law 53G 211. Restorative practice, and maybe the best thing to do is start with what the law defines as a restorative justice program, which is to help minors take responsibility for and repair harmful behavior that occurs in school. That's how the statute defines restorative justice program. When I read the definition in line 123 through 126 of restorative practice, I don't see either in actual language or even in the sense this notion of taking responsibility and for repairing harmful behavior. And it seems that our definition is detached from the actual program that we're trying to effectuate. So my motion for the board would be on line 123, it would read, restorative practice means and then I'm just going to pull this language from 53G 211. So you don't have to retype it if you just want to copy and paste it. But the language would be restorative justice program means to help minors take responsibility for and repair harmful behavior that occurs in school. And you can see in our current definition, we talk about within communities, community members, where the program itself specifically says, look, we're looking at behaviors that occur in school. And so I think this definition comports more readily to the restorative justice program. Oh. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I got me turned off.
Well, I was going to call on member there. We also have Tanya with a response as well. So I'm going to let you two decide who goes.
Tanya Alberno's a coordinator for prevention. I oversee the restorative practices implementation that we have here at USBE. We have a specialist who's not here with us today, but I just wanted to also provide a little bit of context here that restorative justice is not the same thing as restorative practices. Restorative justice applies mostly to juvenile justice applications. Restorative practices are more broader practices that help to hold students accountable for their disruptive behavior and provide an opportunity for them to repair harm and restore positive relationships. We do have somewhere, and I'm sorry that I can't speak more to this because I'm not the specialist, but we have a definition for restorative practice. I just want to make sure that with whatever change we make here, that it's in line with other places where we already have that definition. That's all.
Does it, and I understand member Lear still has a question, but does this not capture that? Tanya?
I'm not sure. That's what I'm saying.
Oh,
Like
okay.
I would need to make sure that I do some research with our specialist.
And then I guess another question that I would have, I like this. I like it, concise and to the point. I do wonder with this technological world that we're in. Anyway, some of our harmful behavior that occurs in schools occurs outside of schools and is happening in school. I don't know how to word that. You understand what I'm saying, though. Is there a way, Vice Chair Carey, and again, I don't know if this motion goes through or how that would look. Maybe this does encapsulate that, right? But typically, if a student goes to a teacher and says, hey, so-and-so is saying this about me online, the teacher wouldn't just be like, not my problem, or, when did that happen? Yeah, good luck with that, right? So is there a way to say, because there is a broader aspect out there. And so I'm wondering how we can, just looking at my experiences in schools, how can we help students in school and incidences that they're dealing with at the same time, where I can sit down with the family and say, look, this is happening. We need to do something. There could be potential consequences at the school. Vice Chair Carey. Yeah, just because this is his. Okay, so we'll have him respond to that, and then we'll go to Member Lear.
Thank you, Chair. One of my notes was to put that occurs within the school community. And I think that would cover things that happen at school, outside of school, but within, if a teacher was involved or another student. And I'm happy to, if the motion doesn't belong to the body yet, Ben, I would just way ahead of me. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Lear.
Little troubled. I appreciate Tanya's distinction between restorative practice and restorative justice, which is, I think, what Member Carey was quoting from restorative justice plan. Am I correct? So if there is a distinction, I think that's important. If there's not a distinction, and Member Carey's saying he wants it to be restorative justice practice, then I think we just reference the law and don't repeat the law. If it's important, as Tanya explains, that it's different, that a restorative practice is perhaps broader than a restorative justice plan, then I would prefer to leave the definition as is, having been developed by the field and experts. And I actually think within the school community, harmful behavior is something the courts have said is not always to be remediated by the school or maybe by a student. But there are many times the courts have said where social media has taken place towards students where the school is not responsible legally. So I think that sort of suggests that there's a broader responsibility by the school if we add school community. So I'm troubled by creating this on the fly, unless you want to say you want the definition to be restorative justice practice, then I think maybe that causes this group to rethink their language throughout the rest of the rule.
Thank you, Member Lear. I
circular comment. Sorry.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I understand we're trying to find this balance here, right? Vice Chair Carey, did you have I'm sorry. You have a response to that?
No, I would just say again, as I read the proposed draft and I looked through the addendum of materials and the law, I understand the distinction between the program and the practice, but I think the definition of practice that we've had is detached from the thrust of where the law was trying to take us. Again, they used words like responsibility. They put, it seemed to be an emphasis on repairing this relationship that might have been fractured on the offender versus treating both the victim and the offender as equals. And when I read our definition of restorative practice, it seems to indicate or emphasize this equity in, well, the offender and the victim, they both have this mutuality of, you've got to fix this. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I do think that's detached from the emphasis that I read in the law.
So can I come back to my original question to Member Carey? Then I would be comfortable with what you're proposing if you were to change restorative practice to restorative justice practice, so that it comes back to the definition of the law, but I'm not sure that's what these folks mean. That's my concern. So I hear you. I agree that I want the person to take responsibility, young person or not. But I want to not create new terms. I want to use either the terms we have or intentionally create new terms that are meaningful also with people who are actually implementing these kinds of programs.
Thank you, Member Lear. Member Hart.
So I think this outline or this highlights a common problem that we have in that our policy, our rules need to reflect code, but then we have this element of what we call best practice or what is currently best practice or whatever, and how much do we add to in our rules? What is required for us to put in regarding restorative anything? What are we mandated to have? What is the base that we have to have? So, and then the second question then becomes, how much of best practice do we leave up to the LEA to determine? And we provide resources and trainings and materials. And how much do we mandate in a rule? And so I want to be really clear, like going back to what we just said about discipline policies, my opinion changes when someone reminds me that we have a statutory responsibility of monitoring discipline plans. That changes our baseline. What is our baseline for restorative anything? Is anybody able to answer? Is that a question that makes sense?
I believe it does. I will give it my first shot though. So this rule, if you like Control F for restorative, there are a lot of references to restorative justice, restorative practices that have been in the rule throughout the years. However, a lot of the, as you've all alluded to, has changed at the statutory level, right? So currently in this last draft, there is no reference anymore to restorative justice programs in this rule. So that would be safe to take out, period. But aside from that, the reference to restorative practices is that an LEA shall implement positive behavior intervention supports and restorative practices as part of an LEA's continuum of behavior interventions and strategies. I will let staff talk to what is required in law, but that is the only thing. And so there is a lot of latitude, I think, for what you're saying, that we're just saying that should be a consideration. However we define restorative practices, that should be a consideration in their development of a continuum of services that they provide to students for behavior purposes. But I'll let
yeah. And my question is
Right.
that also in code, or is that
Right.
something we added?
Tanya Alvarez. I'm just not prepared to speak to this today because my specialist is not available. I'm wondering if there's any way we can have some time to maybe coordinate around that.
So I think it's the feel of the committee as well to get this right. And I hate to postpone it another month, but we want to get it right. Is that what I'm getting from the committee? Now we still have about 10 minutes. Let's move on from this restorative portion because if that's okay with the committee, or do we still have questions?
No.
Is there an urgency to passing this? There's always an urgency. I know, I get it.
There was a couple very, very small edits that we were making in response to the legislative session last year. So there is in that sense. However, it's not like on a continuation calendar or something like that. So it's what the board is comfortable with at this point then.
Member Wood.
I do have a legislator who has been calling me to ask when his rule was going to be made. So there is one legislator who is waiting anxiously for a handful of items that are in draft 3 to be taken care of. So just for
Elise.
To speak to that. So if you recall in legislative session last year, Representative Ward passed a bill about the rights of all students and adults in the room to be protected from regularly occurring predictable behaviors. And so there was a working group put together by our office that brought in members from throughout the field to make recommendations. That group convened their last convening, I think, about a week ago. So the changes that they suggested on how to incorporate that new piece of legislation into our rules is in draft 3. It is green. That is helpful. But where it is, I don't know. Actually, it's blue. Sorry. All the colors. 296 through 306. And so that is a relatively small change, but it is important. And Representative Ward is anxious that is in our rules. So there it just outlines that in the LAA discipline policy, it should include requirements in different sections of law, including his law. So 53G 8210, 53E 7207, as well as the special education laws that also kind of interact with his law. So that is one thing that is time sensitive, I think, as far as legislation.
Thank you. Member Wood.
And in the green, I did add up in the definition of classroom management, that is language directly from his bill to that line 37, but my computer has frozen, so
Okay.
I can't scroll.
So the committee then is in a situation here where we don't want to rush things, but there is some sense of urgency. The question, I guess, would be, can we, and I looked to Vice Chair Carey working on this, maybe Member Hart working on this restorative aspect. Is this something that can be done in a month, that we're going to feel comfortable? I mean, we'll have staff here that can answer questions. Do we move this? Are we happy with the rest of this, and do we move it forward knowing that changes are coming? Vice Chair Carey.
I would oppose that just based on past experience. I would just prefer that. I mean, I'm going to make the motion on restorative, and if it passes, great. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But I would do it that way, and then I would still work with Vice Chair Hart and staff to dig deeper into it. But I don't want it to continue without at least the attempt made to include that language. Now, I will say this. I looked at my calendar on December 25th. I'm free. So if you would like to schedule
what does your wife's calendar say? Yeah. Member Hart, go ahead.
Yeah. So do you think, and I understand I understand his concerns, and I get it. Do you think that it would be satisfactory if we let them know that we passed those particular amendments, but that we are still doing work on the issue of restorative practices? Because then his amendments have been passed. The rule just hasn't passed. And I mean, would that be at all helpful?
I don't know how procedural that would work.
Well, if we pass an amendment, we pass an amendment.
Pass the rule and then
Pass
do
the
what
rule.
that Joe didn't like, but.
Well, there is a motion that was put before us, and this is what Vice Chair Carey was talking about. Look, I put a motion before the committee. If the committee votes it down, fine, we'll move on. But let's at least address that motion. Do we have that where we can look at that? And we'll just take a vote and go from there. And if more work needs to be done, which it sounds like it does, then it will be. So there's a motion to amend lines 123 to 126 to read: restorative practice means to help minors take responsibility for and repair harmful behavior that occurs within the school community. Member Wood.
I have a question to our staff regarding that. I noticed that you use the definition in the LRBI for restorative practices, and it refers to Chapter 3. How does this change in definition change any of the work that you have in that Chapter 3 related to restorative practices, or does it?
So the definition we actually pulled from the national training and the literature regarding restorative practices. So that's where this language comes from. However, in the LRBI, as long as we still have that foundation spelled out, which I'm pretty sure we do, there's, I think there's a chapter or a section on it, then it shouldn't impact our practice. Yes.
Okay. So restating the motion one more time before we take a vote is that the committee amends line 123 to 126 to read restorative practice means to help minors take responsibility for and repair harmful behavior that occurs within the school community. I'm going to take individual votes. We'll start with Member Lear. Member Lear's a no. Member Wood? Member Hart?
Can you go back and show 123, please?
Lines 123.
Mm-hmm.
As we're looking at that, do you have a question, or you just want to look at it while you contemplate?
I just want to look
vote?
at exactly what it
Okay.
what it replaces.
Vice Chair Carey, your vote? My vote is a yes as well. And so we'll circle back to, oh, go ahead, Member Hart.
So what this, I just want to clarify so that I understand. If we do this, then there's no restorative practices referred to anywhere else in the rule currently.
There are instances of restorative practice in the, yeah, so things would need to be adjusted accordingly, maybe. We haven't looked at that. This is a definition, right?
Right,
And so
but,
we would have to make sure that it falls within there.
Right, but restorative practice is used elsewhere in this rule.
The rule, yes.
But we would not have a definition of it.
Well, we would have a restorative practice definition is what, changing the definition is what Member Carey's motion is.
But we changed it to restorative justice. So restorative practice doesn't have a definition.
No, the term is still restorative practice means, and then he used verbiage from the law that speaks of restorative justice.
So we would be defining restorative practice using the definition of restorative justice? Yes.
Does that sound accurate, Vice Chair Carey? Yes. As amended, yeah, and we did change that a little bit. So we're not going to cite law here, and we're not going to quote it because it's not quoted.
Right.
Chair Hymas, would you mind putting back up, yes, that definition?
We can, but I want the committee and staff to recognize that we are in the middle of a vote here and we have 3 votes on the table. Do we want to pause this and reopen this up?
No,
I don't want to bring staff in if we're, you know what I mean?
I do.
Member Wood, are you ready?
Yeah, because as I'm looking at code, I'm just going to explain my vote. I know we're not the Senate, but
No, you're fine.
we have restorative justice practices, we have restorative programs, and we have restorative approaches in statute. I think that I am a no until we have figured out what all those things are and how they relate, and that we're moving forward in a proper direction.
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. Member Hart.
I'm going to explain my vote. I don't think this motion matters because we're going to have to clean all those things up. So sure, I mean, we can change this, but we have a responsibility to our field to do to the three things that Member Wood just said have to be clarified, and this is going to have to be changed again. So for now, yes, because it provides some clarity, but I fully expect it to change again because we need to, when a term is used so loosely, like it is in our code, or in our rules, it no longer has meaning. And that's what's happened to this restorative word. And so this is an attempt, so I'll vote for it, but it is nowhere near solving our problem. So yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Member Hart, so that passes with myself, Vice Chair Carey, and Member Hart is yes. Member Wood and Member Lear as no. Let's continue on. We are at 12:31, just as a recognition. We can decide whatever we want to do. We can continue going, but I know we have to be back here at 1, and I hope you guys get something to eat. Member Wood.
I move that we move this to our January agenda.
For committee
For committee.
Okay.
And work on the restorative language. And I'll just have to call Representative Ward and tell him we are desperately working on this.
So Member Woods put a motion before the committee that the committee postpone this item. And I would assume the LRBI manual. That is that a wrong assumption, Member Wood?
No, it's not a wrong.
Okay. So move those two items, agenda item 3.5 and 3.6, to the January Law and Licensing Committee meeting, which will look different because, yeah, please speak to that.
Well, I thought about moving this forward, but I think there's a lot to this. And with the LRBI manual also, I think it just puts staff also in this weird space of where are we going if we move it forward, but it's not really ready. And then we spend hours in a board meeting because the committee didn't really finish its job. And so I think it's better off to come to committee.
Any other thoughts, Member Lear?
I agree with Member Wood, and for the reasons that Member and Mr. Carey said he would like to move forward, I'd like to hold it for another month because I think we need to do it right, and I think we need to not confuse the field. And yes, we have at least 3 definitions that look very similar but are different. And I think that Leanne's offering to do the hard work of talking to Representative Ward. So I think we need to not suggest that we're done with this.
Thank you, Member Lear. Any other thoughts, Vice Chair Carey?
Yeah, just what Tanya, Director Albanese, Coordinator Albanese was saying. The lead on this is not here today, and I think we would all benefit from their insight and knowledge. So I would support the motion.
Seeing no other lights or hands, Member Hart, did you have a comment? Or are we ready
yeah,
to?
and I
Go ahead.
volunteer to go with you, Member Wood, and meet with the legislator and explain also from a practitioner standpoint how we actually want the same thing he does. We just want to get it right, and it's not for lack of trying. So just volunteering for that hard conversation, and I support the motion as well.
Okay. So the motion before the committee is that the committee postpone item 3.6 and 3.5 to the January Law and Licensing Committee meeting. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously. Final motion to adjourn, made by me, made by Vice Chair Carey.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.